This Airbnb guest left a 1-star review because, and I'm not making this up, the gravity in the apartment was too strong. If you think that's the peak of human stupidity, you haven't seen anything yet. What beats complaining about physics? 1. Sarah Jenkins stood outside what she swore was the wrong building, frantically dialing customer service while her Uber driver watched in bewilderment. The address matched her booking confirmation perfectly, but she refused to believe it. "This can't be right," she insisted to the representative. "The door is blue, not red like in the photos." The customer service agent patiently explained that lighting conditions affect photo colors, but Sarah wasn't having it. She demanded a full investigation into what she called a fake address scam. What made this particularly absurd? The mailbox clearly displayed the correct house number, just 3 feet from where she stood. But Sarah refused to check it, claiming that mailboxes can be wrong too. Instead, she spent 45 minutes on the phone, describing every architectural detail to prove this wasn't her rental. The host, watching from the window, finally came outside with the booking confirmation and his driver's license showing the same address. Even then, Sarah remained skeptical. She took photos of the street sign, measured the distance between houses, and called her sister to verify the GPS coordinates. The whole neighborhood probably thought she was a private investigator. Her final theory: someone had moved the entire building overnight as part of an elaborate Airbnb conspiracy. The host later added a bright yellow arrow pointing to his front door, along with a laminated sign reading "Yes, this is the right house," though somehow, that didn't prevent the next confused guest from calling about the suspicious yellow arrow. 2. Sarah Chen stood at what she was absolutely certain was the wrong address, clutching her phone like a lifeline. The bright red door in front of her didn't match the photos she'd studied obsessively for weeks. Those photos clearly showed a blue door. This had to be fake. She called Airbnb customer service in a panic, explaining how the host had obviously given her a fraudulent address. The poor representative tried walking her through basic troubleshooting. "Ma'am, can you check the mailbox number?" But Sarah wasn't having it. That would mean admitting she might be wrong, and the door color was irrefutable evidence of deception. For 20 minutes, she paced the sidewalk, building an increasingly elaborate conspiracy theory. Maybe the host was running some kind of scam operation. Maybe they'd photoshopped the door color to throw off potential burglars. The customer service rep suggested she simply knock on the door to verify. Sarah refused, convinced this would alert the fake residents to her presence. Then there's the moment when the actual host stepped outside, wondering why someone had been circling their property for half an hour. Sarah's face went through several stages of realization as she noticed the blue paint can sitting on the porch. The host had literally repainted the door that morning as a surprise refresh for guests. Sarah's conspiracy theory crumbled faster than a house of cards in a hurricane, but she still left a review complaining about inconsistent photos. 3. Sarah stared at the hot tub listing photo for the 3rd time that morning. The mountain cabin looked perfect. Stone fireplace, rustic beams, and what appeared to be a luxurious spa experience waiting just outside the back door. She booked immediately, already imagining herself soaking under the stars after long hiking days. The confusion started the moment she walked through the front door. Everything matched the photos perfectly. Cozy living room, check. Fully equipped kitchen, absolutely. But where was that gorgeous hot tub she'd been dreaming about? Sarah dropped her bags and headed straight for the back deck, expecting to find her personal oasis. Nothing. Just a regular wooden deck with 2 plastic chairs and a small Weber grill. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through every single listing photo again. Or wait a minute, that hot tub photo looked familiar, but now she realized it wasn't actually from this property at all. Somehow, she'd gotten her wires crossed and merged 2 different listings in her mind. But Sarah wasn't backing down that easily. She fired off a message to her host, demanding to know where the advertised hot tub had gone. When the confused owner explained that no hot tub was ever mentioned in the amenities list, Sarah doubled down. She insisted that any mountain cabin should automatically include a hot tub, and that the absence of one was basically false advertising. The poor host tried explaining that guests could use the regular bathtub for relaxation. Sarah's response: a demand for a free spa voucher to compensate for her ruined vacation expectations. 4. This guest walked through the front door, looked around the perfectly normal living room, and immediately called their host in a panic. "I'm in the wrong house," they declared with absolute certainty. The address matched perfectly. The key worked flawlessly. But somehow, this couldn't possibly be the right place. The drama started before they even stepped inside. The front door was painted blue, but in the listing photos, it looked more teal. This tiny color difference became undeniable proof that they'd been given a fake address. Never mind that lighting conditions affect how colors appear in photographs. Never mind that monitors display colors differently. The guest refused to check the mailbox number, even though their host politely suggested it during the frantic phone call. "I don't need to check anything," they insisted. "This is clearly not the house I booked." They'd already decided that customer service needed to handle this scam immediately. What makes this even more bizarre? The guest had used GPS to arrive at the exact coordinates provided in their booking confirmation. They'd walked past the correct street number multiple times while pacing nervously on the sidewalk, but that blue versus teal door situation had them completely convinced they were victims of elaborate fraud. The host tried explaining that outdoor lighting makes colors appear different than indoor photography. The guest wasn't having it. They'd already composed a lengthy complaint email about how Airbnb allows hosts to provide completely fake addresses and demanded a full investigation. Sometimes, a door is just a door, painted a slightly different shade than your phone screen suggests. 5. The guest calls the host at 9 p.m., voice trembling with panic. They're standing outside what they claim is a completely different building. The address matches perfectly, but something feels terribly wrong. The front door is blue, not the red one they saw in the listing photos. "This can't possibly be right. I'm looking at 432 Oak Street, but this isn't your place," they insist over the phone. The host double-checks their own address. "Yes, it's definitely 432 Oak Street." The confusion deepens when the guest refuses to look at the mailbox number for confirmation. They're convinced someone has given them fake information. Within minutes, they're on the phone with Airbnb customer service. The complaint: the host provided a fraudulent address. They demand immediate assistance relocating to the real property. The customer service representative patiently explains that addresses don't typically change overnight, but logic isn't welcome in this conversation. The host tries explaining that they recently repainted the front door. Blue replaced red just 2 weeks ago. The listing photos hadn't been updated yet. This reasonable explanation falls on deaf ears. The guest becomes more agitated, convinced they're part of some elaborate housing scam. 20 minutes later, a neighbor approaches the confused guest. "Are you looking for Sarah? She lives right here." The neighbor points to the blue door the guest has been staring at all along. Embarrassment floods the scene, but the guest doubles down. They march inside, muttering about how the photos should have been updated immediately. The host makes a mental note to update listing photos every time they change a light bulb. Day 6. Sarah arrived at the rental property with her suitcase and immediately called customer service in a panic. The front door was blue, not red like in the photos. This couldn't possibly be the right place. She stood on the sidewalk for 20 minutes, scrolling through her phone to double-check the address her host had sent 3 times via email. The mailbox right next to the blue door clearly displayed the correct street number, but Sarah refused to look at it. "I don't need to check numbers," she told the customer service representative. "The door color is wrong, so obviously this is a fake address." She demanded they find her the real property immediately. Her host, meanwhile, watched from the window as Sarah paced back and forth on the sidewalk. He had recently painted the door blue after taking those listing photos 6 months ago. The address was absolutely correct. Every detail matched except for one minor cosmetic change that had nothing to do with the actual location. Then there's the part where Sarah accused the platform of listing fake properties. She threatened to report the host for fraud because she was 100% certain this blue door house couldn't be her destination. The customer service agent spent 40 minutes explaining that hosts sometimes update their property's appearance between photo shoots. Sarah finally entered when her host came outside and physically showed her the booking confirmation email. She never apologized for the confusion. Instead, she left a review warning future guests about misleading door colors and suggested all hosts should notify guests about any paint jobs in advance. 7. Maria booked what she thought was the perfect mountain cabin for her anniversary weekend. When she arrived at the address, she stood outside for 10 minutes, absolutely convinced she was at the wrong place. The front door was painted forest green, but in the listing photos, it looked more like sage green. This tiny difference sent her into a complete panic. She called the customer service hotline immediately, voice shaking with frustration. "You've given me a fake address," she declared to the bewildered representative. "This can't possibly be the right house, because the door is completely the wrong color." The customer service agent tried explaining that lighting and photo filters can change how colors appear online, But Maria wasn't having any of it. The host had provided crystal clear directions. The address was printed on the confirmation email. The GPS led her directly there, and the lockbox was exactly where it should be. Yet Maria refused to even check the mailbox number to confirm she was in the right spot. She spent another 15 minutes pacing the driveway, convinced there was some elaborate mix-up. When the host finally called her back, Maria was still standing outside, suitcases in hand, absolutely certain she was the victim of some booking scam. The host patiently walked her through checking the house number, the street name, and even described the exact shade of green paint they'd used just 3 months earlier. Only then did Maria reluctantly accept that photo filters might have played tricks on her expectations. She finally went inside, muttering about false advertising. Bait. The guest stood at the sink, watching the faucet like it owed them money. 30 seconds. That's how long it took for hot water to arrive, and apparently that was 30 seconds too many. They tapped their foot impatiently, muttering about false advertising and wasted time. Most people would consider this normal. Water heaters need a moment to send hot water through the pipes, but not this guest. They demanded actual instant hot water, as if the laws of physics were just suggestions the host chose to ignore. The complaint email arrived within hours. They described those 30 seconds as unacceptable, and claimed the time lost standing at the sink had ruined their entire morning routine. The host read this twice, wondering if it was a joke. Then came the threat to call Airbnb about the slow water. The guest seemed genuinely convinced that hot water should materialize the exact moment they turned the handle. They suggested the host install a system that would keep boiling water ready at all times, apparently unaware of the safety hazards this would create. The most bizarre part, they recommended that boiling water should happen faster, as if the host controlled the speed of molecular heating. The review they left focused entirely on those 30 seconds, warning future guests about the delayed gratification of the plumbing system. The host now includes a note in their guidebook, explaining how water heaters work, complete with diagrams. Sometimes education is the only defense against unreasonable expectations. 9. Martha booked what she thought was the perfect getaway cabin, complete with photos of a cozy sofa and mountain views. But when she arrived, she had a problem, a big one. The sofa was too comfortable. Yes, you read that right. She called the host within hours, voice trembling with what could only be described as furniture-induced panic. The couch, according to Martha, was some kind of trap. She'd sit down to check her phone and suddenly find herself 3 hours later, still sinking into the cushions like quicksand. Getting up required what she described as significant physical effort, and planning ahead. She genuinely believed the host had orchestrated this on purpose. Or why would anyone buy furniture this soft unless they wanted to keep guests prisoner? But here's where it gets even stranger. Martha demanded the host replace the sofa immediately, not after her stay during it. She wanted a firm, uncomfortable replacement delivered to the living room while she was still there. When the host politely explained that furniture stores don't work that way, Martha's frustration reached new heights. She blamed the couch for making her oversleep, miss her hiking plans, and generally ruin her active vacation. Her final review became legendary in host circles, warning nap trap ahead. This couch will steal your day, and possibly your soul. Host clearly designed this as a guest detention system. Bring your own camping chair if you want to stay awake. The host still gets messages asking about the famous comfortable couch. 10. The guest's voice trembled with panic when she called customer service at 2 a.m. She was absolutely certain she'd been given a fake address, because the building she stood in front of couldn't possibly be her rental. The front door was blue, not the green she remembered from the photos she'd studied obsessively for weeks before her trip. What made this situation particularly baffling was that the host had provided crystal clear directions. The address was printed on her confirmation email, texted to her phone, and even written on a sticky note she'd attached to her suitcase. But none of that mattered, because this guest had already made up her mind that something was terribly wrong. The customer service representative patiently asked her to check the mailbox number to confirm she was at the right location. Simple request, right? The guest flat out refused. She insisted that checking the mailbox was pointless, because she knew with absolute certainty that this couldn't be the correct building. Her reasoning was ironclad in her mind. The door color was different, therefore everything else must be wrong too. Then came the accusations. She demanded to know why Airbnb allowed hosts to list fake addresses, and questioned whether this was some kind of elaborate scam. The poor customer service agent spent 45 minutes trying to convince her to simply look at the numbers on the mailbox. Meanwhile, the host received 3 separate phone calls about their fraudulent listing and had to walk outside in their pajamas to wave at the guest, who was standing directly in front of the correct building the entire time. 11. The guest walked through the front door, looked around, and immediately called the host in a panic. Something was terribly wrong. The light switches were nowhere to be found, despite being mounted right next to the door frame where any reasonable person would expect them. But this guest, they pulled out their phone flashlight instead. For the next 20 minutes, they wandered through the house like they were exploring a cave. The beam of their phone illuminated perfectly functional light switches on every wall. Standard white toggle switches, nothing fancy or hidden, just regular switches doing their switch thing, waiting patiently to be flicked. The guest walked past the living room switch 4 separate times. Each time they shined their phone light directly on it, then kept walking. It's like their brain refused to process what their eyes were seeing. They even took a photo of the wall to document the lack of lighting controls for their complaint. Then came the demands. All light switches needed to glow in the dark, they declared. How else would guests find them? The current setup was completely invisible and posed a safety hazard. They threatened to report the host to Airbnb for having invisible lighting systems. The host, baffled by this review, actually went to the property afterward to double-check. Yep, switches were there, bright white against beige walls. Impossible to miss, unless you're actively trying not to see them. The solution: the host now sticks fluorescent arrows pointing to every single switch. Problem solved. Dignity slightly dented. 12. The guest arrived at the property on a Tuesday evening, absolutely convinced they had booked the wrong place entirely. They stood outside the front door for 20 minutes, staring at it like it had personally betrayed them. The door was painted a cheerful blue color, exactly as shown in the listing photos, but somehow, this guest was certain it should have been red. They called the host 3 times within the first hour. Each call grew more frantic than the last. This can't be right, they insisted during the second call. The address you gave me must be fake. The host calmly repeated the address, which matched perfectly with what was written on the booking confirmation. Still, the guest refused to believe it. Then came the truly baffling part. The mailbox sat directly next to the front door, clearly displaying the correct house number in bold brass digits. Yet, when the host suggested checking the mailbox to confirm the address, the guest flat out refused. I shouldn't have to do detective work, they declared indignantly. The situation escalated when they contacted Airbnb customer service to report a fraudulent address. They spent 40 minutes on hold, convinced they were the victim of an elaborate scam. The customer service representative patiently walked them through confirming the address, which naturally matched exactly. The guest finally entered the correct house, but not before leaving a review questioning the confusing address system. Sometimes you wonder how these people navigate their daily lives without getting lost in their own driveways. 13. The guest walked into the pristine Airbnb and immediately became furious, not about the cleanliness or the amenities, but because the bedsheets had tiny blue flowers while the curtains displayed bold red stripes. This was apparently a design catastrophe of epic proportions. They fired off a message to the host within minutes. How could you do this to people? They wrote, attaching photos of the offending textiles as evidence. The guests spent their first hour documenting every angle where the patterns clashed, building what they called their complaint portfolio. But wait, it gets better. They demanded the host explain their interior design choices in writing, not just a quick apology. They wanted a full breakdown of the decision-making process. Why blue flowers? Why red stripes? Was this some kind of psychological experiment on unsuspecting guests? The host, baffled by the intensity, offered to provide extra blankets to cover the sheets. Wrong answer. The guest interpreted this as admitting guilt and doubled down on their crusade for matching patterns. They started researching color theory and sent the host a detailed guide on complementary patterns. Then came the kicker. They contacted 3 local decorators and got quotes for emergency room coordination services. The guest genuinely believed the host should pay for professional consultation to fix what they called visual assault on tired travelers. The final review was a masterpiece of indignation. 2 stars with 1 full paragraph dedicated to warning future guests about the chaotic textile situation, and another paragraph rating the host's apparent colorblindness. The host still wonders if this guest inspects their own closet with the same intensity. 14. The guest arrived at the property and immediately called customer service in a panic. Birds were chirping outside their window at sunrise, and they were furious about it. This wasn't just mild annoyance. They wanted a full refund because nature dared to make noise during their stay. The complaint escalated quickly. They demanded proof that the host had installed bird control measures around the property. When the host explained that birds naturally live in trees and wake up when the sun rises, the guest accused them of being unprofessional. They insisted this was false advertising because the listing didn't specifically warn about wildlife noise pollution. But here's where it gets really strange. The guest suggested the host should install soundproof windows throughout the entire house just to block out chirping. They compared the morning bird sounds to construction noise and claimed it violated their right to peaceful sleep. The irony: they had specifically booked a cabin-style property surrounded by trees because they wanted a nature experience. Their review became legendary among hosts in the area. They wrote 3 paragraphs describing how the aggressive birds had conspired to ruin their vacation. They even included audio recordings as evidence of the excessive noise levels. The guest recommended future visitors bring industrial-strength earplugs and white noise machines. The host was baffled. They had been renting the same property for years without a single complaint about birds. Other guests often mentioned how lovely it was to wake up to natural sounds. This guest, however, wanted Mother Nature to come with a volume control. They left demanding the host contact local wildlife authorities about relocating the problem birds. 15. Sarah walked into the vacation rental kitchen expecting gourmet cooking adventures. Instead, she found 3 lonely refrigerator magnets holding up a pizza delivery menu. This wasn't just disappointing, it was a personal attack on her postcard collection dreams. She had packed 17 scenic postcards from her hometown, ready to create an Instagram-worthy fridge display that would showcase her artistic eye and travel sophistication. The 3 magnets couldn't handle her creative vision. 2 were basic black circles that looked like they came from a discount store clearance bin. The 3rd was a chipped souvenir magnet from some random beach town the host probably visited in 2003. Sarah tried arranging her postcards in different configurations, but physics wasn't cooperating with her aesthetic goals. The postcards kept sliding down like rejected art gallery submissions. She spent 47 minutes attempting various magnetic arrangements. Nothing worked. Her carefully curated collection of vintage postcards from local antique shops deserved better treatment than this magnetic poverty. The host clearly didn't understand that refrigerator real estate was premium display space for sophisticated travelers who appreciated visual storytelling through carefully arranged memorabilia. But Sarah had a plan. She drove to 3 different stores, bought a collection of colorful magnets with inspirational quotes, and strategically placed them across the entire refrigerator surface. Her protest installation transformed the boring appliance into a magnetic wonderland. The note she left explained how future guests would benefit from proper magnetic infrastructure. She even included a detailed diagram showing optimal magnet placement for maximum postcard capacity and visual impact. 16. The guest checked into what appeared to be a perfectly normal Airbnb rental. Clear address, matching street number, correct building color from the photos. Everything lined up exactly as advertised. But somehow this guest became absolutely convinced they had entered the wrong house entirely. They called the host in a panic, insisting the front door was painted blue instead of the advertised green. The host calmly explained that yes, the door was indeed blue, and yes, the photos clearly showed a blue door. The guest argued that they had specifically booked a place with a green door and demanded to know where the real house was located. Well, things escalated quickly from there. The guest refused to check the mailbox number, claiming it would be a waste of time since they were obviously in the wrong building. They called Airbnb customer service, reporting a completely fake address and demanding immediate relocation to the correct property. The customer service representative pulled up the listing, confirmed the address matched perfectly, and even walked through the photos with the guest. Still not convinced, the guest spent their first night convinced they were trespassing in someone else's home. They left a 1-star review stating the host had provided a decoy address and warning future guests about the address scam. The host responded with screenshots of their own listing, highlighting the blue door that had been visible in every single photo. 17. The guest opened the refrigerator door and immediately felt betrayed. Their grapes had gotten cold overnight. Not just cool, actually cold, like grapes are supposed to be when refrigerated. This was clearly the host's fault for setting the temperature too low. They tried turning the dial, but who has time to figure out appliance controls during vacation? The complaint email arrived within hours. My food became chilled after storing it in your refrigerator overnight. They wrote with the seriousness of someone reporting a crime. They demanded compensation for their spoiled snacks, apparently unaware that refrigeration prevents spoiling rather than causes it. The host stared at the message, wondering if this was some elaborate joke. But wait, there's more. The guest didn't stop at grapes. They documented every cold item like a forensic investigator. The yogurt was too firm, the cheese felt different, even their bottled water had lost its room temperature charm. Each discovery added fuel to their growing outrage about this defective appliance. Then came the masterpiece, a detailed guide titled "How Cold is Too Cold" that they attached to their review. It included temperature recommendations for different foods, complete with diagrams. They suggested hosts should warn guests about excessive cooling in their listings. The irony, most guests complain when food isn't cold enough. This guest somehow expected a refrigerator that kept things at the perfect temperature without any adjustments. The host now includes fridge operation instructions in their welcome book, just in case. 18. The houseplants in this Airbnb weren't doing anything wrong, they were just sitting there being plants. Green, leafy, and minding their own business. But this guest, they felt judged. Seriously judged, by foliage. The complaint started innocently enough. The guest mentioned feeling watched during their stay. The host assumed maybe it was the neighbors or street noise. Nope, it was the spider plant hanging in the corner and the peace lily by the window. These innocent plants had apparently developed opinions about their temporary roommate. The plants seem sad when I walk by, the guest wrote in their review. They look disappointed in my life choices. The host read this 3 times, wondering if it was some kind of joke. It wasn't. The guest was completely serious about being emotionally evaluated by vegetation. But wait, there's more. The guest refused to water the plants because it's not my job to make them happy. They'd specifically requested the host handle all plant care during their stay, as if the fern in the bathroom might stage a revolt if left unattended. The poor host lived 2 hours away. The final straw, the guest claimed the plants made the entire room feel awkward and tense. They suggested removing all greenery from future stays or at least providing friendlier plants. Whatever those are, the host now warns guests about the judgmental houseplants in their listing. The plants remain unbothered and continue their silent reign of terror. 19. Sandra from Minnesota discovered something truly devastating during her weekend getaway. One of her favorite polka dot socks had vanished into the mysterious void that exists somewhere between the washer and dryer. This wasn't just any sock. It was part of her lucky travel pair, the ones she wore on every vacation since 2019. The panic set in immediately. She tore apart the laundry room like a detective at a crime scene. Behind the dryer, nothing. Under the washer, just dust bunnies and a random quarter. She even checked inside the lint trap 3 times, convinced her sock had somehow transformed into grey fuzz through some supernatural laundry process. But here's where things got interesting. Sandra didn't just accept this as one of life's unsolved mysteries like the rest of us do. She marched straight to her laptop and crafted what would become the most detailed missing sock report in Airbnb history. The review included a full description: blue with yellow polka dots, size 7, slightly stretched around the ankle area from my hiking boots. She demanded the host conduct a thorough investigation of their appliances. The poor host found themselves explaining the basic physics of laundry to a grown adult. They even offered to replace the sock, which somehow made Sandra more suspicious. Why would they offer a replacement unless they were hiding something? The host's review response was pure gold. Guest lost sock in dryer, checked with sock detective agency. Still missing, offering reward for safe return. 20. This guest walked into the Airbnb kitchen and immediately started complaining. Where was the air fryer, the panini press, the espresso machine with 17 different settings? They expected a professional chef's kitchen, complete with gadgets they'd probably seen on cooking shows but never actually used themselves. The basic blender sitting on the counter, absolutely unacceptable. This wasn't just disappointing, it was crushing their culinary dreams apparently. They wrote a scathing review about the minimal kitchen setup. Never mind that most people use Airbnb kitchens to reheat leftovers or make instant coffee. This guest had planned elaborate meals that required equipment worth thousands of dollars. They complained about the lack of a stand mixer, a food processor, and something called a molecular gastronomy kit. The host probably didn't even know what that was. The review got worse. They demanded the host update all appliances yearly to keep up with food trends, because nothing says reasonable request like expecting someone to spend their mortgage payment on kitchen gadgets for entitled guests. The host's simple response was perfect. The kitchen has everything needed for basic cooking. Basic wasn't good enough for this aspiring top chef contestant. Here's the kicker. Other guests loved the kitchen. Previous reviews praised its functionality and cleanliness, but this particular guest had watched too many Food Network shows and expected Gordon Ramsay's personal kitchen setup. They left photos of their dream kitchen in the review, complete with price tags. The audacity was impressive, really. Some people book a place to sleep, others expect a culinary school experience. 21. The microwave sits innocently on the kitchen counter, looking like every other microwave in existence. But this guest has identified a critical flaw that somehow escaped decades of appliance engineering. The turntable spins counterclockwise instead of clockwise, and apparently this is a catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. The complaint email arrives at 2 a.m., written with the urgency of someone reporting a house fire. Your microwave rotates the wrong way. It begins, with capital letters doing the heavy lifting for emphasis. The guest explains in painstaking detail how they've used hundreds of microwaves throughout their life, and every single one spun clockwise. This deviation from what they consider industry standard has somehow ruined their entire heating experience. Then comes the scientific analysis. The guest claims their leftover pizza heated unevenly because of the backward rotation. They've apparently conducted multiple tests, timing each rotation and documenting hot spots. Photos accompany the complaint, showing a slice of pizza with arrows pointing to cooler areas. The guest seems convinced that clockwise rotation is not just preferred, but essential for proper heat distribution. The threat comes next. They're considering reporting this faulty appliance to Airbnb customer service as a safety hazard. The microwave, they argue, could be dangerous if it continues operating against conventional rotation patterns. Their final recommendation: the host needs immediate retraining on proper microwave standards. Because obviously, hosts personally program the direction of microwave turntables before each guest arrives. 22. Margaret booked what she thought was a luxury spa retreat, complete with premium toiletries and endless pampering supplies. She packed light, expecting the host to provide everything needed for her weekend of relaxation. The listing photos showed a beautiful bathroom, with elegant soap dispensers and fluffy towels. Everything looked perfect for her self-care getaway. But then reality hit. The shampoo bottle sitting on the shower shelf was roughly the size of a travel container you'd get on an aeroplane. Margaret stared at it in disbelief. This tiny bottle was supposed to last her entire 3-day stay. She had thick, long hair that required generous amounts of product just for one wash. After her first shower, the bottle was nearly empty. Margaret felt genuinely betrayed by what she saw as false advertising. The photos had shown full-sized bottles, or at least that's how she remembered them. She immediately started crafting a detailed complaint email to her host, explaining how inadequate toiletry supplies had ruined her spa experience. The situation got worse when Margaret discovered there were no backup bottles hidden in the bathroom cabinet. She searched every drawer and shelf, convinced the host must have stashed extra supplies somewhere. Finding nothing, she marched to the nearest drugstore and bought her own shampoo, keeping the receipt for reimbursement purposes. Margaret's review became legendary among local hosts. She wrote a 500-word essay about proper shampoo bottle sizing, complete with mathematical calculations showing how much product different hair types require. She suggested hosts provide industrial-sized containers or offer refills upon request. The review concluded with her overall rating dropping from 5 stars to 2 stars, purely because of inadequate hair care provisions. 23. The guest ripped through the entire pack of paper napkins in a single day, not a typo. One day. They somehow managed to use every single napkin the host had thoughtfully provided for their 3-day stay. By evening, they were frantically searching through kitchen cupboards like a treasure hunter looking for gold. But here's where it gets really wild. They didn't just quietly run out and move on with their lives. No, they fired off an angry message to the host, demanding to know why there weren't backup napkin supplies hidden throughout the apartment. They genuinely believed that hosts should stockpile napkins like they're preparing for the apocalypse. The guest's solution: they suggested implementing a napkin rationing system, where each guest gets a specific allocation per meal. They even did the math. According to their calculations, every guest should receive exactly 12 napkins per meal, with bonus napkins available for messy foods and emergency spills. Then there's the restaurant comparison that really sealed the deal. They wrote a detailed review explaining how restaurants never run out of napkins, so why should Airbnb hosts be any different? They seem to forget that restaurants have staff constantly restocking supplies, while Airbnb hosts aren't lurking in closets waiting to refill napkin dispensers. The host was left scratching their head, wondering what exactly this person was eating that required an industrial quantity of napkins. Were they using napkins as plates? Making napkin art? The mystery remains unsolved, but the 1-star review about inadequate napkin infrastructure lives on forever. 24. Sarah stares at the ceiling above her bed, squinting like she's trying to solve a math problem. The guest complaint email sits open on her laptop screen. 2 different guests, same week, same room, completely opposite problems about the exact same ceiling. Guest number 1 wrote 3 paragraphs about how the high ceilings gave her vertigo. She claimed looking up made her dizzy and demanded the host adjust the height for future stays. The woman actually measured the ceiling at 12 feet and called it dangerously tall. She suggested installing a drop ceiling or at least warning guests about the extreme altitude in the listing description. But here's where it gets weird. Guest number 2, who checked out just 2 days later, left an equally passionate review about the ceilings being too low. He's 6 feet tall and felt cramped by what he called oppressive 12-foot ceilings. This guy wanted the host to raise the ceiling, or offer a discount for the claustrophobic experience. Sarah reads both complaints again, wondering if they stayed in different dimensions, same room, same measurements. One person felt like they were in a cathedral, the other felt trapped in a cave. The first guest wanted a ladder warning label, while the second guest suggested the host knock out the floor above to create more breathing room. The really twisted part, both guests gave 1-star reviews and demanded refunds. They each wrote detailed explanations about proper ceiling heights and room proportions. Sarah now has to respond to 2 people who experienced the exact opposite reality in her perfectly normal guest bedroom. 25. The guest stepped out of their rental car and stared at the beautiful mountain cabin. But instead of feeling excited, panic set in. They immediately pulled out their phone and called customer service, voice shaking with urgency. This can't be right. The listing shows a blue front door, but this one is clearly navy blue. The customer service representative tried explaining that navy blue is essentially a shade of blue. The guest wasn't having it. What makes this story even more ridiculous? The address was crystal clear in their booking confirmation. The GPS had led them directly to the correct location. The house number matched perfectly with their reservation details. But the guest refused to even glance at the mailbox to confirm they were at the right place. They were absolutely convinced that someone had given them a fake address as part of some elaborate scam. Then there's the fact that they spent 20 minutes on the phone, arguing with customer service instead of just walking up to check. The host could see them through the window, standing by their car, gesturing wildly while talking on the phone. When the host finally came outside to help, the guest accused them of being part of the conspiracy. The kicker, the guest had taken a screenshot of the listing photo and kept comparing it to the actual door, zooming in and out repeatedly. They genuinely believed that a slight difference in blue shades meant they were at a completely wrong property. Sometimes reality is stranger than any joke you could write. 26. The guest arrives at the Airbnb and immediately calls the host in distress. They're standing outside what appears to be the correct address, but something feels terribly wrong. The photos online showed a blue front door, but this door is clearly navy blue. These can't possibly be the same color, right? The guest paces back and forth on the sidewalk, phone pressed to their ear, explaining to the increasingly confused host that they must have been given fake directions. What makes this situation even more bizarre is the guest's absolute refusal to check the mailbox number. The host suggests this simple solution multiple times during their 20-minute phone conversation. But no, the guest insists that looking at numbers won't help because the door color is wrong. They've already made up their mind that this can't be the right place. The host tries explaining that lighting conditions affect how colors appear in photos versus real life. The guest escalates the situation by calling Airbnb customer service directly. They file a formal complaint about receiving a fraudulent address and demand immediate assistance finding the real location. The customer service representative spends another 30 minutes trying to explain that the address is indeed correct. Meanwhile, 3 different neighbors come outside to see what all the commotion is about. The guest waves them off, muttering about hosts who can't provide accurate information. Eventually the guest does enter the building, but only after the host arrives in person to physically point at the mailbox numbers. The guest still maintains in their review that the door color was misleading and suggests future guests bring a color matching chart to verify they're at the right location. 27. The guest arrives at the Airbnb property, walks up to the front door, and immediately calls the host in a panic. They're absolutely convinced they're standing at the wrong building. The address matches perfectly. The photos in the listing show this exact same house. But somehow, this guest is certain they've made a terrible mistake. What's their evidence for this grand confusion? The front door is blue instead of the navy blue they expected from the photos. Never mind that lighting and phone screens can change colors. Never mind that paint might look different in person than on a computer. This guest has decided that a slightly different shade of blue means they're lost in some parallel universe. The host tries to explain that this is indeed the correct address. They read the house number aloud. They described the garden known by the mailbox that's clearly visible in the listing photos. But the guest refuses to believe it. Instead, they demand to speak to customer service immediately because they're convinced the host has provided a fake address. Here's the really amazing part. The guest won't even check the mailbox number to confirm they're in the right place. That would be too simple. They'd rather spend 20 minutes on the phone with customer service, arguing that the entire listing must be fraudulent. The host watches from the window as this guest stands right next to the mailbox, phone pressed to their ear, insisting they're victims of some elaborate Airbnb scam. Sometimes the simplest solutions are invisible to people who've already decided they're right. 28. The guest walks into the rental property and immediately panics. They're absolutely convinced they've entered the wrong building. Never mind that the address matches perfectly with their booking confirmation. The numbers on the door, clearly fake. The street name must be a coincidence. This guest has decided that reality itself is playing tricks on them. What triggered this crisis of confidence? The front door was painted blue instead of the green they saw in the photos. Apparently, hosts are required to maintain the exact same paint color for eternity. The fact that photos might be slightly outdated or taken in different lighting conditions. Completely unreasonable. Paint changes over time, but logic doesn't seem to work here. The guest refuses to check the mailbox number for confirmation. That would be too simple. Instead, they immediately call customer service in a state of panic. They're demanding answers about this fake address that the host has supposedly provided. The customer service representative tries explaining that paint colors can change, but the guest isn't buying it. This becomes a 40-minute phone call, where the guest insists they're standing outside the wrong building. They're reading the address numbers aloud, confirming the street name, and describing the exact house from the listing photos. Yet somehow they remain convinced it's all an elaborate hoax. The blue door has shattered their entire understanding of how vacation rentals work. Eventually they do enter the correct house, but not before leaving a review warning future guests that hosts might change door colors without notice, and that the address verification system is clearly broken. 29. The dining room table looked normal enough. 4 chairs surrounded a wooden surface that had seen better days but still served its purpose. What caught this particular guest's attention wasn't the scratches or the slightly wobbly leg that most people would notice. No, this guest had laser focus on something far more pressing. The chairs weren't all the same height. 3 chairs sat at standard dining height. The 4th chair, clearly a replacement from somewhere else in the house, stood about 2 inches shorter. Most people would shrug, grab a cushion, or simply pick a different chair. But not this guest. They pulled out a measuring tape and documented the exact height difference between each seat. The photos they took were meticulous. Each chair photographed from multiple angles, with the measuring tape clearly visible. They even created a small chart showing the height variations, complete with arrows pointing to the problem areas. Their complaint email arrived the same evening, complete with the photographic evidence and a detailed explanation of how mismatched furniture ruins the harmony of shared meals. The host received a demand for either uniform replacement chairs or a partial refund for the dining disruption. The guest suggested consulting a furniture expert who could explain proper table-to-chair ratios. They claimed the height difference made them feel off balance during breakfast and created an uncomfortable power dynamic when other family members sat in the taller chairs. Well, the host learned something new that day. Apparently, chair equality is a serious matter in the vacation rental world. Who knew dining furniture could cause such emotional distress? 30. The guest called customer service at 2 a.m., voice shaking with panic. "This has to be a scam," she insisted. "The address you gave me is completely wrong. I'm standing outside some random house and it doesn't look anything like the photos." The customer service agent, used to late-night confusion calls, asked her to double-check the address. She rattled off the exact numbers and street name that matched perfectly with the booking confirmation. But here's where it gets interesting. The guest was absolutely convinced she was at the wrong place because the front door was blue instead of red. She'd studied the listing photos for weeks, planning her perfect vacation, and remembered every detail. Well, almost every detail. What she didn't notice was that the photos were taken during different seasons, and the previous owner had painted the door blue before selling to the current host. The agent suggested she check the mailbox number to confirm. "I'm not going to walk up to some stranger's house and look at their mail," she snapped back. "That's probably illegal." Instead, she demanded a full refund and accused the platform of running fake listings with made-up addresses. She spent another hour on the phone, growing more frustrated as the agent tried to explain that house colors can change over time. The real kicker: she was standing directly in front of the correct house the entire time. The host later found her Ring doorbell footage showing the guest pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear, while repeatedly looking up at the house number that matched her booking exactly. Sometimes the simplest explanations are the hardest ones to accept. 31. The guest arrived at what they thought was the wrong building, and immediately called customer service in a panic. They were absolutely convinced the host had given them a fake address. The front door was painted blue, not the green they remembered from the photos. Never mind that they'd been scrolling through dozens of listings that week. This had to be wrong. What makes this even more bizarre: the address was crystal clear in their booking confirmation. The street number, street name, and even the apartment unit were all there in black and white. But instead of simply checking the mailbox number right next to the door, they chose to stand on the sidewalk for 20 minutes, frantically dialing Airbnb support. The customer service representative patiently walked them through the booking details. Same address, same blue door that was clearly visible in several listing photos. The guest insisted this couldn't be right because they remembered it differently. They demanded the representative call the host to confirm this was indeed the correct building. Meanwhile, the host watched from the window as this guest paced back and forth, phone pressed to their ear, gesturing wildly at the perfectly correct address. The mailbox with the matching numbers sat directly in their line of sight. All they had to do was look down. When the guest finally accepted this was their destination, they left a review complaining about the confusing address and misleading door color. They suggested future guests bring a GPS and verify everything twice because hosts apparently can't be trusted with basic location information. The host still scratches their head about this one. 32. Sarah Miller stood at the curb staring at the address written on her phone, then back at the house. The numbers matched perfectly. The street name was correct. Even the distinctive red mailbox that the host had mentioned in the welcome message was right there in front of her, but Sarah wasn't having it. She called the Airbnb customer service line 3 times in 15 minutes, each call more frantic than the last. "This can't be right," she insisted to the bewildered representative. "The address you gave me is fake. I'm standing here and this is definitely not the place." The customer service agent tried explaining that hosts don't provide fake addresses, but Sarah cut him off. She was absolutely certain something was wrong. Here's where it gets interesting. The front door was painted navy blue, not the forest green she'd seen in the listing photos. Never mind that the host had sent a message 2 days earlier explaining they'd just repainted. Sarah hadn't bothered reading past the check-in instructions. She refused to walk up to the mailbox to verify the house number, claiming it would be trespassing on someone else's property. The poor customer service representative spent 45 minutes on the phone while Sarah paced the sidewalk. Meanwhile, the actual host watched from the window, holding Sarah's welcome basket and wondering why their guest was having an animated conversation with thin air. When Sarah finally knocked on the door, she sheepishly admitted she might have been overthinking things. The host just smiled and handed over the cookies. 33. The piano sits there in the living room, gleaming black and clearly expensive. Most guests would think, "Wow, nice touch," and maybe snap a photo, but not this guest. They immediately noticed something was missing. Where were the automated keys? Where was the self-playing mechanism that would fill the room with mysterious melodies? The complaint came within hours of check-in. "I see you have a piano, but it doesn't play itself," they wrote to the host. "I can't actually play piano, so this feels like false advertising. I was expecting it to entertain us during our stay." The host stared at the message, wondering when regular pianos became a problem. The guest continued their argument with impressive determination. "Luxury hotels have player pianos that work automatically. I assumed this would be the same standard." They compared the acoustic piano to outdated technology and suggested the host should invest in a digital piano with built-in songs. The guest even provided links to specific models they recommended, complete with pricing and installation guides. Then there's the part where they demanded a partial refund for the non-functional piano taking up valuable living room space. They argued that if the piano couldn't play itself, it was essentially just expensive furniture. The host tried explaining that many guests enjoyed having a real piano available, even if they couldn't play it perfectly. The final review mentioned the piano disappointment prominently. Listing shows piano but doesn't mention you need actual musical skills to use it. Very misleading for non-musicians like myself. The host now specifies in their listing that the piano is acoustic and requires manual operation. 34. Coffee makers aren't rocket science, but apparently this guest needed NASA to figure one out. They'd never encountered a basic drip coffee maker before, and stood there staring at it like it was some alien technology. The buttons might as well have been hieroglyphics. Water goes in the back, coffee grounds in the filter, press the big red button. Simple stuff, right? But no. This guest demanded an in-person tutorial from the host. They actually wanted someone to drive over and demonstrate how to make coffee. When that didn't happen, they escalated their demands to full barista-level training. We're talking about a standard Mr. Coffee machine here, not some fancy espresso contraption with steam wands and pressure gauges. The morning caffeine withdrawal kicked in hard, without their usual coffee fix. This guest spiraled into full complaint mode. They left a scathing review blaming the host for their lack of coffee education. According to them, every Airbnb should come with detailed brewing instructions and possibly a certified coffee professional on standby. Then there's the follow-up email they sent. Pages of feedback about how hosts need to provide coffee-making workshops for technologically challenged guests. They suggested video tutorials, laminated instruction cards, and maybe even a hotline for brewing emergencies. The host was baffled. Most people figure out coffee makers by trial and error in about 30 seconds. The weirdest part, this guest traveled internationally but had apparently survived without ever making coffee at home. How does someone reach adulthood without encountering this basic kitchen appliance? The host ended up taping step-by-step instructions to the machine, complete with arrows and pictures, just to avoid future coffee catastrophes. 35. Sarah thought she had prepared for everything during her romantic getaway booking. She specifically chose a place with blackout curtains in the photos, but when she arrived at the charming cottage, reality hit differently. A tiny sliver of morning sunlight managed to sneak through a microscopic gap where the curtains met the window frame. This wasn't just any light. This was what Sarah described as aggressive sunshine that somehow targeted her sleeping face with laser precision. She spent her first morning moving around the bed like she was dodging a spotlight. The irony, the room was 99.8% dark, but that 0.2% became her entire focus. Sarah immediately contacted the host with photographic evidence. She had actually used photo editing software to darken the room further, claiming this represented her reasonable expectations. The edited photos looked like a cave. When the host politely explained that complete darkness was challenging to achieve with natural fabrics, Sarah suggested installing industrial-grade blackout systems. But here's where things got weird. Sarah threatened to post the original photos online as proof of false advertising. She wanted other guests to see the cruel deception of near-total darkness. The host, baffled by the complaint, offered eye masks as a solution. Sarah declined, stating that eye masks were not the point. She demanded double-layered curtains, weather stripping around windows, and a written guarantee of absolute darkness. Her review later warned future guests to bring your own cave equipment, because apparently regular blackout curtains weren't black enough for someone seeking vampire-level room conditions in a countryside cottage. 36. The guest called 3 times before noon on their first day. They wanted to know when exactly the weekend would be extended, not the checkout time. They understood that part. They literally believed their host could somehow make Saturday and Sunday longer. The conversation went in circles for 20 minutes while the host tried to explain how calendars work. This wasn't someone joking around either. They genuinely thought Airbnb hosts had some special arrangement with time itself. When Monday morning arrived, they refused to pack their bags. Their logic: the weekend felt too short, so clearly it wasn't actually over yet. The host found them still in bed at 11 a.m., insisting they had been robbed of proper weekend time. The guest's review became legendary in hosting circles. They docked 2 stars specifically because the host failed to provide adequate weekend duration. They suggested that future listings should include exact weekend hour counts. Better yet, they recommended Airbnb implement a new policy allowing weeks to have 10 days instead of 7. What makes this even stranger is how seriously they took their complaint. They researched time zones, thinking maybe they could squeeze extra hours that way. They asked neighbors if their weekend felt longer. They even contacted customer service to file a formal complaint about chronological disappointment. The host's response was perfect though. They simply wrote back, "Unfortunately, I don't control the space-time continuum. That's above my pay grade." Sometimes the most ridiculous complaints deserve the most straightforward answers. The guest never responded, probably still waiting for someone to invent longer weekends. 37. The guest stood at the front door, phone pressed to their ear, voice rising with panic. "I'm telling you this can't be the right place." They'd been circling the property for 20 minutes, convinced something was wrong. The address matched perfectly. The house number gleamed clearly on the mailbox. But in their mind, this was all some elaborate mistake. What triggered this meltdown? Squirrels. Not just any squirrels. The neighborhood squirrels that dared to exist in the trees around the property. These fluffy-tailed creatures had committed the ultimate crime of being visible during daylight hours. The guest watched in horror as one squirrel scampered up an oak tree, then another appeared near the bird feeder. "They're everywhere," they whispered into the phone to customer service. The real kicker came when they demanded the host cut down all the shade trees. Not trim them, not relocate the bird feeders. Complete tree removal. "It's a safety issue," they insisted, explaining how the squirrels were clearly watching them from the branches. The host tried explaining that squirrels are harmless neighborhood residents, but logic had left the building. Then there's the follow-up email that arrived later. The guest had researched local animal control services and provided a detailed list of companies the host should contact immediately. They'd even calculated the estimated cost of tree removal and suggested the host start a GoFundMe campaign for guest safety improvements. Their final review warned future visitors about the squirrel surveillance system and recommended bringing anti-rodent protection. The host still gets occasional messages asking about the current squirrel population status. 38. Sarah clutched her phone like a lifeline, frantically dialing customer service at 2 a.m. The panic in her voice was unmistakable. "This has to be fake," she shrieked into the phone. "The address you gave me doesn't exist." The customer service rep, probably questioning their career choices at that moment, tried to calm her down. Sarah had been standing outside the correct building for 20 minutes. The address matched perfectly. The house number was clearly visible on the mailbox, just 3 feet away from her. But Sarah refused to look at it. "The front door is blue," she announced dramatically, as if she'd uncovered some international conspiracy. "Your photos clearly show a green door." The photos actually showed a blue door, but Sarah had convinced herself otherwise. She'd zoomed in, analyzed the lighting, even adjusted her phone's color settings. Nothing would convince her this was the right place. The host, awakened by the commotion, peeked through the window. There was Sarah pacing back and forth, gesturing wildly at the mailbox she refused to acknowledge. When he stepped outside to help, she backed away suspiciously. "You're not the real host," she declared. The real host would never live in the wrong house. It took 45 minutes of gentle coaxing before Sarah finally glanced at the mailbox. The number matched her confirmation email perfectly. Her response? "Well, somebody must have changed the numbers while I was on the phone." 39. The guest stared at the television remote like it was some alien artifact from another planet. 47 buttons stared back at them, each one a mystery wrapped in technological confusion. Power, volume, channel, menu, guide, info, last, exit, enter, return, mute, SAP, CC, PIP, zoom, aspect, sleep, and dozens more. Who needs this many options to watch TV? Instead of pressing the obvious big red power button at the top, they decided every other button deserved a chance first. The TV switched to Spanish, then Korean. The screen flipped upside down somehow. Closed captions appeared in what looked like hieroglyphics. The picture zoomed in so far they could count the pores on a news anchor's nose. 20 minutes of button mashing later, they gave up entirely. The guest pulled out their phone, turned on the flashlight, and wrote a scathing review while the TV displayed a test pattern from 1987. "TV system too complex for normal humans," they typed furiously. "Host expects guests to have engineering degrees, just to watch the weather." The funny thing, the guidebook sitting right next to the remote had detailed instructions, complete with pictures, step-by-step directions that a kindergartner could follow. But who has time to read when there are buttons to press randomly? The host eventually added laminated labels to every single button on the remote. Bright yellow stickers that said "Power press this first" in bold letters, even drew arrows pointing to the important ones. Some guests still manage to activate the parental controls and lock themselves out of everything except the shopping channel. 40. Maria stood at what she was absolutely certain was the wrong house. Phone pressed to her ear as she demanded customer service fix this obviously fake address. The door was blue, not the red she'd seen in photos. Never mind that she was looking at the garage door while the front entrance sat clearly visible 20 feet away, painted exactly as advertised. She'd been circling the block for 40 minutes, growing increasingly frustrated with what she called Airbnb's mapping system failure. The host had provided crystal clear directions. Turn left at the coffee shop, second house on the right, number 247, clearly visible on the mailbox. Simple enough for anyone to follow, but Maria refused to check the actual mailbox number, convinced that the entire address system had somehow conspired against her vacation plans. She'd driven past the correct house 6 times, each time becoming more certain that the listing photos were completely fabricated. Customer service patiently explained that hosts can't just invent addresses. GPS systems don't randomly generate fake locations. The address existed, the house was real, and she was probably standing right in front of it. Maria disagreed completely, insisting she had a natural sense of direction that couldn't be fooled by simple house numbers. 20 minutes later, she finally walked up to the mailbox she'd been avoiding. There it was, 247, exactly as promised. The red front door was right there too, just like in the photos. But instead of admitting her mistake, Maria called back to complain that the host should have made the house number more visible from the street. 41. This guest walked into an Airbnb and immediately knew something was terribly wrong. The mirror above the bed was positioned all wrong according to feng shui principles. Not just slightly off, completely offensive to proper energy flow. The guest fired off messages to the host within hours of arrival. The mirror placement was bringing bad vibes into the room. Sleep would be impossible with such negative energy swirling around. This wasn't a simple preference, this was about spiritual wellness and ancient Chinese philosophy that the host clearly didn't understand. Well, the demands started rolling in. Remove the mirror entirely, or face a scathing review. The guest even took the time to create a detailed room layout drawing, complete with arrows showing proper furniture placement. Red ink highlighted where the mirror should never ever be positioned. Blue ink showed acceptable alternatives. But here's where it gets interesting. The guest blamed every single sleep problem on that mirror. Tossed and turned all night. Mirror's fault. Woke up feeling groggy. Obviously the bad energy. Had a weird dream about flying hamsters. Definitely caused by improper feng shui. The host received a 3-page email explaining energy flow, qi movement, and the dangers of reflective surfaces in bedrooms. The guest provided links to feng shui websites, YouTube videos, and even offered to arrange a consultation with their personal energy healer. The host was completely baffled by this very specific superstition, but learned way more about ancient Chinese interior design than they ever expected from running an Airbnb. 42. The welcome mat complaint ranks among the most bizarre feedback any Airbnb host could receive. This guest didn't just notice the mat, they analyzed it like a literature professor examining Shakespeare. The simple welcome message apparently fell short of their hospitality expectations by several miles. Most people see a welcome mat and think, okay, they're welcoming me, not this guest. They wanted creativity, personality, maybe even a personalized greeting with their name embroidered in gold thread. The generic nature of the mat became their primary grievance, overshadowing everything else about the property. The review went into painful detail about mat messaging standards across the hospitality industry. They suggested hosts should invest in custom mats for each guest, rotating them based on visitor preferences and arrival dates. The logistics alone would drive any host to madness, but the guest presented this as a reasonable request. What makes this even more ridiculous? The mat worked perfectly fine. It welcomed people, it protected the floor from dirty shoes, it served every practical purpose a mat should serve, but apparently functional wasn't enough. It needed to spark joy and inspire social media posts. The host probably spent more time reading this review than the guest spent looking at the actual mat. They demanded personalized touches that would cost more than most guests pay for an entire night's stay. The negative rating centered entirely on absent creativity in floor-covering messaging. Some complaints reveal more about the complainer than the property. This guest's mat obsession suggests they expect every detail of their vacation to be curated specifically for their entertainment, down to the doorway accessories. 43. The The guest arrived at what they swore was the wrong address. Despite the host providing crystal clear directions and GPS coordinates, they stood outside the correct building for 20 minutes, convinced they were in some sort of Airbnb twilight zone. The front door was blue, but they remembered seeing a red door in the photos. Actually, the photos clearly showed a blue door, but facts weren't going to get in the way of a good panic. Rather than checking the mailbox number that was clearly visible right next to the door, they decided to call customer service instead. The conversation lasted 45 minutes. They demanded to know why the host had provided a fake address, and insisted this was some kind of elaborate scam. The customer service representative patiently explained that the address was correct, and suggested they look at the mailbox number. But here's where it gets really weird. The guest refused to check the mailbox. They claimed they shouldn't have to verify basic information, and that hosts should make addresses more obvious. They wanted a full refund for the inconvenience of standing outside the wrong building. The customer service rep finally had to walk them through checking the address step by step, like talking someone through defusing a bomb. When they finally realized they were at the correct location all along, did they apologize? Not exactly. They left a review complaining that the address was confusing, and that future guests should bring a magnifying glass to read the mailbox. They also suggested the host install a neon sign with flashing arrows pointing to the correct entrance. The host now leaves welcome mats with the address printed in giant letters. 44. Sandra from Minneapolis nearly called the police because she couldn't figure out which towels were meant for her face. The bathroom had 3 perfectly normal towels hanging on hooks. 1 large bath towel, 1 medium hand towel, and 1 smaller washcloth. But Sandra was convinced there was some secret code she was missing. She spent 20 minutes staring at the towels like they were ancient hieroglyphics. The host's guidebook mentioned shower instructions, Wi-Fi passwords, and local restaurant recommendations, but apparently Sandra needed a full dissertation on towel hierarchy. She eventually used the large bath towel to dry her face after the first shower, then panicked when she realized she might have broken some unwritten rule. The next morning, Sandra sent a frantic message to her host asking for a towel demonstration video. She claimed the guidebook didn't mention towels enough, and that future guests would face the same confusion. Her host politely explained that towels work the same way everywhere, but Sandra wasn't satisfied. Then there's the part where she marked this as a critical hygiene issue in her review. She wrote 3 paragraphs about towel sizing, and suggested that all hosts should color-code their bathroom linens. Sandra even recommended laminated instructions be posted next to every towel rack. Her host now leaves a small note that says use any towel for anything. But honestly, some people could find confusion in a room with just 1 towel. Sandra's towel crisis became legendary among local hosts who share stories about their most bewildering guest requests. 45. The houseplants scattered around the living room caught this guest's attention immediately, but not in a good way. They were upset that none of the plants had little name tags or identification labels. How were they supposed to know what they were looking at? The guest genuinely believed every single plant should come with its own miniature sign, like some kind of botanical museum display. The frustration grew when they tried to take Instagram photos of their vacation rental. They wanted to caption their posts with the specific plant names, but they had no idea what any of them were called. Was that leafy thing in the corner a philodendron, a pothos, some exotic species they'd never heard of? The mystery was driving them absolutely crazy. They spent hours trying to identify each plant using phone apps, getting increasingly annoyed with every failed attempt. Their complaint email to the host was surprisingly detailed. They accused the host of hiding information and making the stay less educational than it should have been. According to this guest, proper hospitality meant labeling everything in the house, especially living things that guests might want to learn about. They even suggested that future visitors would appreciate knowing whether the plants were toxic to pets or safe to touch. The review they left was completely focused on this plant labeling issue. They warned other guests about the mystery leaves throughout the house and recommended bringing a plant identification book. The host was genuinely baffled by this feedback, having never considered that anyone would want their houseplants to come with instructional materials. 46. The guest stepped out of their car, looked directly at the host, and declared with absolute confidence that nobody could possibly compliment shoes that ugly. Wait, that's not how this story actually started. Let me back up. This guest had spent considerable time selecting the perfect footwear for their vacation. New leather boots. Expensive ones. the kind that make you walk differently because you're so proud of them. They arrived at the Airbnb, expecting the host to notice. Not just notice, they wanted genuine enthusiasm about their fashion choices. The host greeted them warmly, helped with bags, explained the Wi-Fi password, and showed them around the property. Standard check-in procedure. But something was missing. Something crucial. The host never once mentioned those beautiful, expensive, attention-worthy boots. The guest waited. Surely the compliment would come during the house tour. Nothing. They tried positioning their feet more prominently, while learning about the coffee maker. Still nothing. Finally, they realized this host simply didn't appreciate good footwear. How could someone in the hospitality business be so blind to style? Then there's the review they left afterward. 1 star. The reason? Host showed no interest in guests' appearance or effort. They wrote 3 paragraphs about hospitality standards. Apparently, good hosts should comment on everything from shoes to hairstyles to jewelry choices. They suggested that Airbnb should train hosts on how to properly compliment guests upon arrival. The host read this review twice, trying to understand what went wrong. They had been friendly, helpful, and accommodating, but they never realized that their job description apparently included fashion commentary. Makes you wonder what other unspoken expectations guests might have, right? 47. The bathroom amenities looked perfect in the photos. Crystal clear shots of elegant soap dispensers and luxurious toiletries arranged just so. But when this guest walked into the actual bathroom, they discovered something that would spark a complaint heard round the Airbnb world. The soap wasn't the same brand as shown in the listing photos. Not even close. Where the images displayed an artisanal, handcrafted bar with fancy packaging, reality delivered a generic store brand. The guest immediately felt deceived, as if they'd been lured in by false advertising of the highest order. They didn't just notice the difference, they documented it. Photos of the promised soap versus the delivered soap filled their phone's camera roll. Side-by-side comparisons. Close-ups of ingredient lists. Even a measurement of the soap bar dimensions, because apparently size matters when you're this upset about bathroom amenities. The complaint email arrived within hours. Your listing clearly shows premium soap, they wrote. But what we found was clearly a substitute. They accused the host of bait-and-switch tactics, demanding an explanation for this major letdown. Well, here's the thing about listing photos. They capture one moment in time. Hosts occasionally run out of their usual supplies and grab replacements from the local store. It's not a conspiracy, it's real life happening. But this guest saw it as a betrayal of trust. Their entire bathroom experience had been ruined by soap that still cleaned just fine. The review mentioned this soap situation 3 separate times, warning future guests about potential product placement disappointments. 48. The doorbell rang at exactly 3:47 p.m., echoing through the house like a fire alarm. Sarah nearly jumped out of her skin, dropping her coffee mug on the kitchen counter. The sound reverberated off the walls, bouncing around the living room and seemingly following her into every corner of the house. She grabbed her chest, heart still pounding from the shock. Within minutes, her phone buzzed with a lengthy message from her current guest. The complaint was detailed, thorough, and completely unexpected. According to the guest, the doorbell was aggressively loud and had startled them during their afternoon meditation session. They demanded Sarah either replace it with a gentle chime or provide written warnings about the volume in her listing description. The guest went on to explain that the ringing had been so jarring, it appeared in their dreams that night. They woke up thinking someone was at their door back home. This apparently ruined their entire sleep cycle and meditation routine for the remainder of their stay. They suggested that all doorbells should come with volume controls, like televisions or radios. Sarah stared at her phone, reading the message twice to make sure she understood correctly. Her doorbell had been the same standard model for 8 years. No previous guest had ever mentioned it being too loud. She walked over and pressed the button herself, listening to what sounded like a perfectly normal doorbell chime. By evening, Sarah was seriously considering disconnecting the doorbell entirely. Maybe a simple door knocker would cause fewer complaints. Then again, knowing her luck, someone would probably complain that the knocking was too quiet. 49. Sarah Martinez stared at her phone in absolute disbelief. The weather app had promised sunshine all weekend. She'd planned the perfect picnic, complete with Instagram-worthy sandwiches and a vintage wicker basket. But here she was, watching raindrops assault her rental's windows like tiny liquid bullets. Her first instinct, call her Airbnb host, demanding answers. "Why didn't you warn me about the rain?" she asked during their awkward phone conversation. The host, Mike, paused for what felt like an eternity. "I'm sorry, but I don't control the weather," he replied, genuinely confused by the complaint. Sarah wasn't having it. She'd checked 3 different weather apps before booking. All had shown sunny skies. This had to be someone's fault. The conversation escalated quickly. Sarah insisted that hosts should provide accurate weather forecasts as part of their service. She'd seen other listings mention sunny balconies and perfect for outdoor dining. Wasn't it false advertising to not guarantee the weather? Mike tried explaining that meteorologists sometimes get things wrong, but Sarah had already made up her mind. She spent 20 minutes crafting her review. "Trip was wetter than expected," she wrote, giving the property 2 stars. She detailed how the unexpected rain had ruined her entire vacation experience. The fact that she'd enjoyed the cozy fireplace, played board games, and discovered a charming local bookstore during the downpour didn't make it into her feedback. Rain, apparently, trumped everything else about her stay. 50. Guest surprises everyone by claiming their electric toothbrush needs a USB charging port built into the bathroom wall. They're genuinely shocked when the host explains that most people just plug their chargers into regular outlets. But this traveler insists that modern listings should come equipped with dedicated USB stations for every possible device. They even took photos of the outdated electrical setup to include in their complaint. The situation gets more bizarre when they suggest the host should survey all future guests about their charging needs before arrival. They want a pre-check-in questionnaire, asking about phone brands, laptop types, and yes, toothbrush models. Their review warns other travelers to bring backup charging solutions because this particular Airbnb doesn't support modern oral hygiene technology. Well, the host tried explaining that a simple adapter would solve the problem instantly. The guest wasn't having it. They insisted that asking travelers to bring their own adapters was basically asking them to pack the hotel room themselves. Their logic was that if the listing claims to be fully equipped, it should handle every electronic device imaginable without requiring guests to think ahead. The final twist came when they updated their review weeks later. Apparently they'd stayed at 3 other Airbnbs since then, and none had USB toothbrush charging either. But instead of realizing this might be a personal expectation issue, they doubled down. Now they're on a mission to convince Airbnb that USB charging stations should be mandatory in every bathroom. The host updated their amenities list just to avoid future confusion, but honestly wondered what device would be next. 51. This guest had an unusual complaint about the bedroom environment. They expected to hear the rhythmic ticking of an analog clock for proper ambiance. Without that familiar sound, they claimed the silence felt too absolute and unsettling. The guest actually used their phone timer to create artificial ticking sounds but insisted it wasn't the same authentic experience they craved. What makes this particularly amusing is that most people specifically request quiet bedrooms for better sleep. This guest wanted the opposite, but they needed that steady tick-tick-tick to feel comfortable. They suggested in their review that all Airbnb hosts should provide analog clocks as standard equipment. The irony: previous guests at the same property had actually complained about clock ticking being annoying and keeping them awake at night. The host found themselves in an impossible situation. Some guests want absolute silence, others apparently need mechanical sounds to fall asleep. You can't please everyone when it comes to bedroom acoustics. The guest wrote a detailed review explaining how the vibe was completely wrong without proper clock sounds. Well, here's the thing about ambient noise preferences. They're incredibly personal. What soothes one person drives another crazy. This guest genuinely believed that ticking clocks should be mandatory in all rental bedrooms. They even suggested specific clock brands and placement locations for optimal sound distribution. The host now keeps both digital and analog clocks available, letting guests choose their preferred sleep soundtrack. Sometimes the most ridiculous complaints actually lead to better hospitality solutions. Who knew clock ticking could be such a divisive bedroom feature? 52. The guest stared at the bathroom soap dispenser, like it had personally betrayed them. 3 pumps produced what they described as an excessive foam volcano that refused to disappear. They spent 20 minutes trying to rinse off what should have been a simple hand wash. The bubbles clung to their skin like they were auditioning for a soap commercial nobody wanted to see. Their complaint email arrived within hours, complete with a detailed breakdown of foam density and rinse time calculations. They'd actually timed how long it took to wash off the suds, 47 seconds, to be exact. They felt this was completely unreasonable for a quick bathroom visit. The host received photos of their hands covered in persistent bubbles as evidence of the foam crisis. The review warned future guests about the industrial-strength soap that creates cleaning challenges. They suggested the host switch to a mild low-foam formula that respects guests' time and water usage. The guest had apparently researched soap viscosity online and provided links to preferred alternatives. Their 3-paragraph soap analysis included scientific terms that made it sound like a chemistry experiment gone wrong. But here's the twist that made the host's day more interesting. The previous guest had complained the exact same soap barely produced any lather at all and demanded something that created proper cleaning bubbles. 2 completely opposite reactions to identical soap from different people staying days apart. The host now keeps both reviews saved as proof that you literally cannot please everyone, even with something as basic as bathroom soap. 53. The guest stared at their phone screen, typing and retyping the Wi-Fi password with growing frustration. 16 characters. Who needs 16 characters for internet access? Their fingers fumbled over the tiny keyboard as they tried to connect for the 3rd time. The password contained a mix of numbers, letters, and symbols that seemed deliberately designed to torture tired travelers. Most people can handle basic passwords, but this guest viewed anything longer than password 123 as a personal attack on their vacation time. They spent 20 minutes attempting different combinations, convinced they were typing it correctly. The rota sat 3 feet away, blinking mockingly at their technological struggles. Rather than ask the host for help, they decided this was worthy of a scathing review. Digital access should be easier, they wrote, as if Wi-Fi passwords were governed by guest comfort laws. They suggested hosts provide QR codes for instant connection, completely unaware that most modern devices already support this feature. The guest blamed the host for their tech stress and claimed the complex password ruined their first hour at the property. They documented their struggle with screenshots, showing multiple failed connection attempts. Their review warned future guests to bring patience for the Wi-Fi setup process. What makes this particularly amusing? The password was clearly printed on a card next to the rota, along with step-by-step connection instructions, but reading instructions apparently wasn't part of their vacation plans. The host later switched to simpler passwords, deciding guest happiness outweighed network security. Sometimes the customer isn't right, but they're definitely persistent about being wrong. 54. Sarah stared at the couch in horror, not because it was dirty or broken. The opposite, actually. The thing was so plush and comfortable that getting up required actual effort. She sank into the cushions like quicksand, except softer and more embarrassing. Within minutes of sitting down, she found herself trapped. The couch had swallowed her whole, and every attempt to stand turned into an awkward struggle. Arms flailing, legs pushing against nothing but air. It was like watching someone try to escape a marshmallow prison. But here's where it gets ridiculous. Sarah became convinced this was intentional. The host, she decided, had deliberately chosen furniture designed to trap guests. Some sort of evil scheme to keep people longer, maybe charge extra fees. The evidence. She'd fallen asleep 3 times just trying to watch TV. Her review read like a warning from a survival expert. "Beware the nap trap," she wrote. "This couch will steal your day, and possibly your soul." She included detailed instructions for future guests on proper extraction techniques. Roll sideways first, then use momentum to propel forward. The host read this feedback with complete confusion. They'd spent extra money on that couch specifically because previous guests complained about uncomfortable seating. Now someone was upset. It worked too well. Sarah's final recommendation? Replace the couch with something firmer, less inviting. Basically, she wanted furniture that actively discouraged relaxation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone except Sarah herself, who remained convinced she'd uncovered a hospitality conspiracy involving weaponized comfort. 55. The guest walked into the Airbnb and immediately felt something was wrong. Not dangerous wrong, just aesthetically wrong. They had pictured themselves signing a charming guest book upon arrival, leaving a heartfelt message for future visitors to discover. Instead, they found an empty entry table with nothing but a bowl of mints. Where was the leather-bound book? The fancy pen on a chain? The tradition of it all? They stood there for a solid 5 minutes, looking around for any sign of a registry. Nothing, not even a notepad tucked into a drawer. The disappointment was overwhelming. This guest had specifically chosen this listing because it looked like the kind of place that would have a guest book. You know, somewhere with character and history. A place where strangers could connect through written words left behind. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of asking the host about it, they grabbed a marker from their bag and started writing directly on the refrigerator. A full paragraph about their travel experience, complete with their signature and the date. They even drew a little smiley face at the end. The host discovered this artistic addition during checkout and wasn't exactly thrilled. The guest's defense? Every proper accommodation should have a guest book. I was just trying to start the tradition. They left a detailed review explaining how the absence of this classic amenity showed the host's lack of attention to proper hospitality standards. The host now seriously considers adding a digital guest book option, just to avoid future refrigerator vandalism. 56. Sarah booked what she thought would be the perfect mountain getaway. The listing showed a cozy cabin with rustic charm and modern amenities. Everything looked exactly right for her weekend escape, but when she arrived and stepped into the bathroom, disaster struck. Well, not really disaster, more like a very specific complaint that would leave her host completely baffled. The shower head was mounted too high on the wall. Sarah, standing at 5 feet 2 inches, couldn't reach it to adjust the angle. She tried stretching on her tiptoes, jumping slightly, even standing on the edge of the bathtub. Nothing worked. The water sprayed over her head at an awkward angle, soaking the bathroom floor instead of providing a proper shower experience. Instead of asking the host for help or looking for a step stool, Sarah grabbed a water pitcher from the kitchen. She filled it repeatedly with warm water from the sink, pouring it over her hair like some sort of medieval bathing ritual. The entire process took 45 minutes. She felt frustrated and slightly ridiculous, but somehow convinced herself this was the host's fault entirely. Her review was brutal. Height bias in bathroom design, she wrote. Clearly only tall people were considered when installing fixtures, discriminatory and inconvenient. She suggested the host provide a step stool for future guests or lower the shower head before each check-in. The host, reading this feedback weeks later, installed an adjustable shower arm. Sometimes the most ridiculous complaints lead to genuinely helpful improvements. 57. Picture this scenario if you can. A guest arrives at their Airbnb rental and immediately starts digging through their luggage like they're on a treasure hunt. What are they looking for? Emergency duct tape. Not bandages, not phone chargers, not even snacks. Duct tape. Because apparently this silver roll of sticky wonder has become the new travel essential that every host should provide. The guest's suitcase had suffered a minor tear during transit. Nothing dramatic, just a small rip along one corner that wasn't even affecting the zipper function. But instead of asking the host for suggestions about nearby stores or simply living with the cosmetic damage for a few days, this traveler launched into full crisis mode. They searched every drawer, cabinet and closet, expecting to find a roll of duct tape waiting for them. When their hunt came up empty, frustration set in fast. The guest genuinely believed that duct tape belonged in the same category as toilet paper and clean towels, basic necessities that responsible hosts automatically stock. Here's where it gets interesting though. This wasn't just about fixing one suitcase. The guest created an entire list of missing essentials that they felt every Airbnb should provide. Duct tape topped the list, followed by superglue, zip ties, and even a small toolkit with screwdrivers and pliers. The review they left was surprisingly detailed. They warned future travelers to bring your own repair supplies, because hosts don't understand that travelers need tape. The host, meanwhile, added emergency duct tape to their shopping list, probably wondering when vacation rentals started requiring hardware store inventories just to keep guests happy. 58. The guest checked into what seemed like a perfectly normal Airbnb, complete with standard electrical outlets throughout the property. But within hours they discovered what they considered a major design flaw that ruined their entire experience. The nightstand next to the bed had regular wall outlets instead of built-in USB ports. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience in their mind. They genuinely believed every piece of furniture should come equipped with modern charging capabilities. The guest spent considerable time searching through their luggage for various charging adapters, muttering about how outdated the accommodation felt. They even took photos of the offending nightstand, highlighting the traditional outlets with red circles like evidence in a criminal case. But here's where it gets really interesting. The guest didn't just mention this in passing during checkout. They wrote a detailed review explaining how the lack of USB ports made them feel like they were staying in the Stone Age. They suggested the host should immediately upgrade all furniture to include integrated charging stations, comparing the experience to luxury hotels they'd never actually stayed at. The host tried explaining that power strips with USB capabilities were available in the welcome basket, but the guest had already made up their mind. They wanted the ports built directly into the nightstand itself. The review concluded with a warning to future travelers about bringing extra adapters for primitive electrical systems. The host now includes a note in their listing about available charging options, though most guests never seem to have this particular issue with basic wall outlets. 59. The bathroom smelled perfectly fine when this guest walked in. Clean towels hung neatly on their hooks. Fresh soap sat by the sink, but something was missing, according to their frantic message to the host at 11 p.m. Where was the perfume? This wasn't about bad odors or mustiness. The closet simply didn't smell like a department store fragrance counter. The guest had opened every door, sniffed every corner, and found nothing but the faint scent of clean laundry detergent. Apparently this qualified as a crisis. They demanded an explanation. Why hadn't the host placed perfume bottles throughout the closet? Where were the scented sachets, the air fresheners, the potpourri? This guest had standards, and those standards included walking into a cloud of artificial flowers every time they reached for a shirt. But here's the weird part. They didn't just complain privately, they wrote a detailed review explaining how the musty closet odors had somehow ruined their fashion sense. They claimed the neutral smell made it impossible to choose outfits properly, because apparently you need Chanel No. 5 wafting around to pick out which socks to wear. The host read this review 3 times, wondering if they'd missed something. They checked their own closets. Normal smell. Clean, maybe a hint of cedar from the hangers. Nothing offensive. This guest genuinely believed every vacation rental should smell like a perfume shop. They even suggested specific brands the host should purchase. Their final recommendation: place perfume bottles everywhere for future guests, because nothing says relaxing getaway like overwhelming floral chemicals in your temporary bedroom. 60. The ice trays were already filled with ice cubes when Maria arrived at her Airbnb rental. Most guests would consider this a thoughtful touch from the host, not Maria. She was absolutely furious about what she called ice intrusion. Maria immediately sent a lengthy message to her host explaining that she specifically wanted to make her own ice. The pre-made cubes, she claimed, represented the host's attempt to control the ice-making experience. She demanded to know why the host had taken away her right to fill the trays herself. The host, completely baffled by this complaint, tried to explain that fresh ice was meant as a convenience. Maria wasn't having it. She spent 20 minutes carefully removing every single cube from both trays, placing them in a bowl, and then refilling the empty trays with water. She took photos of the process as evidence of her displeasure. Her review later stated that the host had violated basic guest autonomy by presuming to make ice without permission. The really weird part is that Maria then complained when her freshly made ice wasn't ready for her afternoon drink. She had to wait 3 hours for the water to freeze. During this time, she wrote additional messages to the host about proper ice tray etiquette. She suggested that all future listings should explicitly state whether ice trays would be left empty or full upon arrival. Maria's final recommendation was that hosts should ask guests about their ice preferences during booking. The host now leaves a note asking guests about their ice cube needs. 61. Sarah stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror and felt personally attacked. Not by anything real or rational, mind you. Just by glass and silver backing doing what mirrors have done since ancient times, showing exactly what's there. But Sarah wasn't having it. She'd arrived at this cozy lakeside cottage after a red-eye flight from Denver, complete with puffy eyes, messy hair, and that special glow you get from airplane air conditioning. The mirror faithfully reflected all of this back to her. Sarah's response: blame the host, obviously. Her complaint email arrived within hours. The mirrors in this property are extremely unflattering and made me look tired throughout my entire stay. She went on to explain how this ruined her vacation photos and demanded the host install more energizing mirrors that enhance natural beauty. The host, Margaret, read this feedback 3 times before showing it to her husband. They both stood in front of the same bathroom mirror, looking perfectly normal. Margaret even tested it with different lighting. Still just a regular mirror doing regular mirror things. What makes this extra amusing? Sarah spent her entire 3-day stay taking selfies in every room, trying to find that one magic angle where the mirrors would cooperate. She never considered that maybe, just maybe, stepping off a plane at 6 a.m. might affect how anyone looks. Margaret eventually responded diplomatically, suggesting that travel fatigue might improve with rest. She didn't mention that mirrors don't actually have beauty settings. Some battles aren't worth fighting. 62. This guest walked into their Airbnb rental and immediately spotted the bookshelf. They weren't looking for reading material, they were conducting an inspection. The classics were there. Shakespeare, Dickens, some poetry collections gathering dust. But where were the bestsellers? Where was the latest John Grisham thriller they'd been meaning to read? The complaint came swiftly. The host's book choices were old-fashioned and out of touch with modern readers. This wasn't just disappointment, it was a personal affront to their literary tastes. They wanted page-turners, not dusty volumes that looked impressive but never got opened. The guest left detailed advice for the host: stock up on current bestsellers, add some romance novels, throw in a few self-help books, make it a real library, not a museum display. Then there's the irony the host discovered later. Most guests don't finish any book during their stay anyway. The novels sit untouched while people scroll through their phones or binge Netflix shows. But this particular guest made the bookshelf their hill to die on. They photographed every spine, counted the publication dates, and wrote a review that read like a literary criticism essay. The host started reconsidering their donation strategy. Maybe that box of paperbacks from the local thrift store wasn't such a bad idea after all. Sometimes you can't win, provide classics and get called pretentious, provide popular fiction and get accused of being shallow. The books just sit there, silent witnesses to human pickiness. 63. The guest's complaint about the ceiling fan being too breezy might sound ridiculous until you realize they genuinely believed the host could control wind physics. This wasn't about adjusting the speed dial or turning it off completely. No, this guest wanted the entire fan replaced with a slower setting model because the current breeze was apparently messing with their mood. The irony. The previous guest had written a scathing review demanding more wind circulation because the room felt stuffy. The host found themselves caught between two impossible demands. One guest needed hurricane-force air movement while sleeping. The next guest treated a gentle ceiling fan like it was creating a tornado in their bedroom. Both left detailed reviews explaining why the fan situation ruined their entire vacation experience. Let's not forget the physics lesson this guest tried to give the host. They explained that wind disrupts sleep patterns and suggested the host research aerodynamic bedroom design. They even offered to send links to fans that rotate slower than normal models. The host politely explained that ceiling fans come with speed controls, but the guest insisted those settings were still too aggressive, even on the lowest option. The solution? The host posted a detailed reminder card next to the fan dial, explaining exactly how to adjust speeds, turn it off, or reverse the direction. But here's the weird part. Some guests now ignore the fan completely, and just complain about air circulation in their reviews instead. You can't win when Mother Nature herself becomes a customer service issue. 64. This guest wanted more exercise during their stay, not a gym membership or jogging trails. They literally complained about the lack of stairs in the house. The single-story layout apparently ruined their fitness goals for the entire vacation. They'd booked expecting multiple flights of stairs to climb daily, treating the rental like their personal stairmaster. The complaint gets funnier when you realize they never asked about the house layout before booking. The listing clearly showed photos of a ranch-style home. Every single picture screamed one-level living. But somehow they'd convinced themselves there would be secret staircases leading to hidden upper floors, or maybe a basement gym. Their review became a masterpiece of misplaced expectations. They calculated how many steps they were losing each day without stairs to climb. According to their math, they'd miss out on 200 steps daily, which would completely derail their fitness tracker goals. The tragedy of it all, really. The host tried suggesting nearby hiking trails and a local fitness center, but nope. The guest wanted their exercise built into the house itself. They'd apparently planned their entire workout routine around climbing stairs multiple times per day. When that plan crumbled, so did their vacation mood. The kicker? Their final review warned future guests about being sedentary by design in this house. They suggested the host either add a second story or install one of those Stairmaster machines in the living room, because apparently that's totally reasonable to expect from an Airbnb. 65. Maria booked what she thought was the perfect coffee lover's retreat. The listing photos showed a beautiful kitchen with gleaming countertops and modern appliances, but when she walked in and spotted the basic drip coffee maker sitting on the counter, her entire vacation mood shifted. Where was the espresso machine? This was 2024, not 1994. She immediately called the host, demanding to know why such an essential appliance was missing from what she considered a premium listing. The host patiently explained that the drip coffee maker was clearly visible in the kitchen photos. Maria wasn't having it. She argued that espresso had become the global standard, and that any serious host should know this. The poor host offered to recommend nearby coffee shops, but Maria felt insulted by the suggestion. Why should she have to leave the house for decent coffee? Then came the review. Maria wrote a 3-paragraph essay about proper coffee preparation, complete with brewing temperatures and extraction times. She included links to recommended espresso machines and suggested the host invest in professional-grade equipment immediately. The review ended with a stern warning to future guests about bringing their own coffee supplies. But here's the twist. Maria actually packed her own portable espresso maker for her next Airbnb trip. She'd learned her lesson about assumptions, right? Wrong. She still left the same type of review at her next destination, claiming their espresso machine wasn't the brand she preferred. Some battles never end, and the great coffee wars of Airbnb continue to brew across kitchens everywhere. 66. Maria expected to walk into her Airbnb rental and see something magical on the ceiling. Not just any ceiling. She wanted glow-in-the-dark stars scattered across it like her childhood bedroom. When she flicked off the lights that first night, darkness greeted her instead of the constellation she'd imagined. This wasn't mentioned anywhere in the listing, but Maria felt deceived anyway. She spent 20 minutes lying in bed, staring up at plain white paint. The disappointment was crushing. Where were the tiny plastic stars that would transport her back to being 8 years old? Maria had booked this place specifically hoping for that nostalgic experience, even though the photos showed a perfectly normal adult bedroom. The next morning, she drove to a dollar store and bought packets of adhesive glow-in-the-dark stars. She carefully arranged them in what she thought looked like the Big Dipper. The project took 2 hours, but finally she had her childhood dream ceiling. When checkout time arrived, Maria packed everything except those stars. She left them stuck to the ceiling as a gift for future guests. Her review mentioned the missing stars as a major oversight. She wrote that hosts should consider adding nostalgic touches to make stays more memorable. The host discovered the surprise constellation weeks later during a deep cleaning. Instead of being annoyed, they found it charming and left the stars up. Maria's complaint accidentally became the rental's most beloved feature, mentioned in dozens of positive reviews that followed. 67. Sarah stared at the microwave like it had personally insulted her family. The door swung open to the left instead of the right. This wasn't just inconvenient, it was apparently a safety hazard that demanded immediate action. She called the host at 11 p.m., voice trembling with righteous indignation. "I nearly tripped over the microwave door," she declared. "It opens the wrong way and I wasn't expecting it." The host, groggy and confused, asked if she was injured. "No injuries," Sarah admitted, but the principle remained. The next morning brought a formal complaint email. Sarah had researched microwave door hinges extensively overnight. She discovered that 60% of microwaves open left-handed, but she belonged to the 40% who expected right-handed operation. This wasn't her fault, it was poor planning by the host. Her proposed solution was comprehensive. The host should replace the microwave immediately with a right-handed model. Better yet, the listing should specify which direction the microwave door opens so future guests could prepare mentally. She even suggested manufacturers should make ambidextrous microwaves that open both ways. The review she left was a masterpiece of specificity. "Microwave door opens left instead of right," she wrote in all caps. "Nearly caused injury on first day. Host needs to consider guest safety when choosing appliances." She attached a photo of the offending microwave with an arrow pointing to the hinge. The host kept the microwave, but they did add a line to their listing. "Microwave door is left hinged. Some battles aren't worth fighting." 68. The guest arrived at Sarah's rental property and immediately called customer service in a panic. They insisted they'd been given a fake address because the tap water was too wet. Not dirty, not metallic, not chlorinated, just wet. Sarah stared at her phone in disbelief as the complaint rolled in through the platform's messaging system. The guest had apparently expected something different from H2O. They demanded that only bottled water be provided for all uses: miches, drinking, brushing teeth, even washing hands. The tap water, they claimed, had an unacceptable wetness factor that made their skin feel moist after contact. Sarah's listing clearly mentioned a water filter system, but the guest dismissed this as inadequate for their needs. What made this even stranger was the guest's follow-up message. They rated the entire property poorly specifically because of the host's tap quality, as if Sarah personally controlled the municipal water supply. The complaint escalated when they discovered that ice cubes made from the tap water were also wet when they melted. Revolutionary discovery right there. By day 2, the guest had switched exclusively to orange juice for all hydration needs. They refused to shower because the water was too aqueous and demanded a refund for what they called substandard liquid services. Sarah found herself Googling whether dry water existed, just to understand what this person expected. The guest's final review warned future visitors to bring their own water testing kit and suggested that Sarah upgrade her hydrogen-oxygen ratio. Physics apparently wasn't their strong suit, but creativity and complaining definitely was. 69. The guest arrived at what they swore was the correct address, took one look at the aquarium setup, and immediately felt betrayed. This wasn't just any fish tank disappointment. They had expected something magnificent. Think hotel lobby grandeur with exotic fish swimming through elaborate coral formations. Instead, they found a simple goldfish bowl sitting on the kitchen counter with one lonely goldfish doing lazy circles. The complaint email arrived within hours. "Where is the proper aquarium?" they demanded. "Your listing clearly shows aquatic life, but this is barely a decoration." The host scratched their head, wondering when their single pet goldfish had been promoted to main attraction status. The photos never claimed anything about elaborate aquarium setups, but somehow expectations had inflated beyond reality. What made this particularly amusing was the guests' detailed suggestion list. They wanted a minimum 50-gallon tank with tropical fish, automated feeding systems and ocean vibes throughout the property. They even included links to professional aquarium services and estimated costs for installation. The commitment to their vision was honestly impressive. The review mentioned feeling deceived by inadequate aquatic amenities and warned future guests about the miniature fish situation. They rated the stay 2 stars specifically because of the goldfish bowl size. The host considered upgrading but realized they'd probably get complaints about water temperature next. Then there's the follow-up message with photos of their dream fish setup. A massive wall-mounted aquarium with LED lighting and exotic species. They genuinely believed every Airbnb should provide this level of aquatic entertainment for guests. 70. This guest walked into what was clearly the right house, but refused to believe it. The address matched perfectly. The key worked in the lock. Yet they stood there, absolutely convinced they'd entered some sort of parallel dimension version of their booking. The drama started with the front door color. Apparently the photos online showed a slightly different shade of blue than what greeted them in person. Not a different color entirely, just a few shades off. Maybe the photographer used a filter, or the lighting was different that day. But this guest, they treated it like discovering the host had photoshopped the entire property. Within minutes of arrival, they were on the phone with customer service, frantically explaining how they'd been given a fake address. The poor representative tried to walk them through checking the house numbers, street signs, and even the mailbox. But here's the weird part. The guest flat out refused to look at the mailbox number. They claimed they didn't need to check because they already knew it was wrong. The host received 3 separate calls that evening. First from the guest, then from customer service, then from the guest again demanding to know why their listing photos didn't match reality. Meanwhile, neighbors watched this person pace back and forth on the correct porch, key in hand, insisting they were lost. Customer service eventually had to conference call the host and guest together just to confirm the address. The guest finally went inside, but left a review warning future visitors about misleading door colors and confusing addresses. Sometimes being right isn't enough when you're absolutely determined to be wrong. 71. Here's something that would make hotel concierges weep with laughter. A guest arrives at a perfectly legitimate Airbnb, checks the address 3 times, and still calls customer service claiming they've been given a fake location. The problem? They expected a chocolate-colored front door based on the listing photos, but found themselves staring at what appeared to be a slightly different shade of brown. This wasn't a case of misleading photography or clever lighting tricks. The door was brown, just not the exact brown their mind had conjured up from scrolling through pictures on their phone. Instead of double-checking the clearly visible house numbers on the mailbox, they stood on the sidewalk for 20 minutes, convinced they were victims of an elaborate rental scam. The host had provided crystal-clear directions. Turn left at the red mailbox, walk 50 feet, look for the house with the small garden gnome. Every detail matched perfectly, except for their personal interpretation of door color. When customer service called the host to verify the address, they discovered the guest was literally standing in front of the correct building, complaining about being sent to the wrong place. The guest refused to approach the mailbox to confirm the numbers, claiming they didn't want to trespass on someone else's property. They demanded a full investigation into what they called address fraud and insisted the listing be taken down immediately. Customer service had to gently explain that front doors sometimes look different in person than in photographs, and that houses don't typically relocate themselves between booking confirmations and arrival dates. 72. Maria Thompson had absolutely no clue what to do with all the stationery she expected to find in her Airbnb rental. She searched every drawer, cabinet and desk surface, looking for paper and pens. Nothing. Not even a sticky note or golf pencil hiding somewhere. This wasn't just disappointing, it was practically criminal in her mind. She'd planned to write heartfelt postcards to 17 different relatives back home. The romantic idea of sitting by the window, crafting thoughtful messages with elegant handwriting, had consumed her thoughts for weeks before the trip. Instead, she found herself staring at empty desk surfaces, like they'd personally betrayed her. But Maria wasn't giving up that easily. She dug through her makeup bag and pulled out a burgundy lipstick. Then she grabbed a stack of paper napkins from the kitchen counter. Problem solved, right? Well, sort of. Writing with lipstick on flimsy napkins turned out to be messier than she'd imagined. The waxy texture smeared across the napkin fibers, creating more abstract art than actual words. Her review later declared the rental creatively limiting and suggested the host immediately install a proper writing corner. She recommended everything from fountain pens to fancy letterhead paper. The host read this feedback with genuine confusion, wondering when providing office supplies became an Airbnb requirement. Maria's lipstick-stained napkin postcards never made it to the mailbox, but her 1-star rating definitely made it to the internet. She still keeps those smudged napkins as evidence of her traumatic writing experience. 73. The guests stared at their phone screen, completely bewildered. They'd triple-checked the address, but something felt terribly wrong. The Wi-Fi network name glowing on their device read Fluffy Paws 2023. Not exactly the sophisticated vibe they expected from their downtown Airbnb. This wasn't just any network name either. It featured the host's 2 beloved cats, complete with the year they were adopted. But here's where things got weird. The guest felt genuinely embarrassed showing friends how to connect. They'd invited colleagues over for a work session, and now everyone had to type in a pet-themed password. The whole situation felt unprofessional, like they'd booked a kid's playroom instead of a serious rental space. The guest fired off a message to the host immediately. They suggested something neutral like guest Wi-Fi or downtown_internet would be much better. The host, meanwhile, had no clue their adorable tribute to Whiskers and Mittens could possibly offend anyone. They'd named it that way because the cats always sat near the router, like little internet guardians. Well, the complaint didn't stop there. The guest wrote a detailed review explaining how network names should reflect modern professional standards. They even provided examples of acceptable alternatives. The host read this feedback with complete confusion, never imagining that their innocent cat appreciation would become someone's vacation deal-breaker. Now the host wonders if every tiny detail of their listing might secretly annoy future guests. Should they survey people about acceptable router names? The whole situation feels like a bizarre new frontier in hospitality complaints that nobody saw coming. 74. The guests stared at the keys in their palm like they were holding medieval torture devices. Too big, they declared. Way too big for modern living. These weren't keys, they were chunks of metal designed to weigh down purses and pockets everywhere. The complaint email arrived within hours. Your keys don't fit my lifestyle. It began as if house keys were supposed to coordinate with personal fashion choices. The guest explained how their minimalist crossbody bag couldn't accommodate such bulky hardware. They'd measured the keys against their phone for comparison photos. The keys lost. But here's where it gets interesting. The guest had suggestions. Lots of them. They recommended digital locks, slim profile keys, or maybe those tiny European-style keys that look like jewelry. They'd done research apparently. Links to Amazon products filled 3 paragraphs of their feedback. The host read this review twice, wondering when keys became a design statement. These were the same keys that had worked perfectly fine for hundreds of previous guests. Keys that unlocked doors, as keys tend to do. Revolutionary concept, really. Then came the follow-up message. The guest wanted assurance that future visits would include updated access solutions. They'd even found a smart lock company that offered bulk discounts for hosts, because nothing says hospitality like completely renovating your entry system because someone's purse was too small. The host actually considered it for about 5 minutes. Smart locks are convenient after all. But then reality kicked in. along with the realization that next week's guest would probably complain the digital code was too long to remember. 75. The guest arrived at the Airbnb and immediately called the host in a panic. "I'm standing outside the wrong building," they declared with absolute certainty. The address was crystal clear in the booking confirmation. GPS had led them directly to the front door, but something felt terribly wrong to this particular traveler. The issue: the front door was painted blue instead of red. The guest had studied the listing photos obsessively before arrival, memorizing every detail. In their mind, that red door from the pictures was the only acceptable entrance. This blue door simply couldn't be right. It had to be some kind of mistake or cosmic mix-up. "Your address must be fake," they told the host over the phone. The host patiently explained that they had recently repainted the door for spring. Fresh blue paint was still slightly tacky to the touch, but logic wasn't winning this battle. The guest refused to believe they were in the correct location. Customer service received an urgent call about fraudulent property listings. The guest demanded immediate assistance for what they called a bait-and-switch situation. They threatened to involve local authorities if this address discrepancy wasn't resolved within the hour. The panic in their voice suggested they believed they were victims of an elaborate scam. The most frustrated part: the guest absolutely refused to check the mailbox number for confirmation. "I shouldn't have to do detective work," they argued. The host eventually walked outside, waved from the blue doorway, and personally escorted their bewildered guest inside. Sometimes vacation stress creates the strangest problems. 76. Water splashing everywhere when you turn on the faucet wasn't exactly what this guest expected during their peaceful getaway, but that's precisely what happened, and boy, did they have thoughts about it. The bathroom sink had one job: direct water downward into the basin. Instead, it shot streams at a rebellious 45-degree angle, soaking the countertop and creating puddles on the floor. Most people would adjust their hand position, or maybe mention it casually to the host, not this guest. They grabbed a protractor, Morse, yes, an actual protractor, Morse, and measured the water stream angle, like they were conducting a scientific experiment. The results? Substandard engineering that violates basic plumbing principles, according to their detailed complaint email. The guest compared this faucet to their home setup, complete with photographs and angle measurements. They demanded the host call a plumber immediately to fix this hydraulic disaster. The review they left read like a physics textbook, complete with diagrams explaining proper water trajectory and flow dynamics. But here's where it gets really interesting. They didn't just complain about their own experience. This guest took it upon themselves to educate all future hosts about stream direction standards. They created a whole guide explaining how to test faucet angles before guests arrive. The host, meanwhile, had used that same faucet for years without any issues. Other guests never mentioned water going sideways, yet this one person turned a slightly misaligned faucet into a full-blown engineering crisis. They even suggested the host contact the faucet manufacturer about defective directional flow systems. Some battles really aren't worth fighting. 77. Jessica stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, staring at the perfectly arranged furniture like it had personally insulted her family. The couch sat against the right wall where it belonged. The coffee table centered in front of it. Two matching chairs positioned at tasteful angles. Everything looked normal to most people, but Jessica wasn't most people. She pulled out her phone and started taking photos from different angles. "This is all wrong," she muttered, measuring invisible energy lines with her hands. The furniture arrangement was apparently disrupting her natural sense of balance. Whatever that meant, within an hour, she dragged the heavy couch across the room to the left wall. The coffee table got shoved into a corner. One chair ended up facing the window. The other pointed toward the kitchen. She stood back, wiping sweat from her forehead, and nodded approvingly. But here's where it gets interesting. Jessica didn't just rearrange the furniture and leave it at that. She documented everything. Photos of the before setup with detailed notes about why it created negative energy flow. Pictures of her improved arrangement with explanations about proper feng shui balance. She even wrote a 3-page message to the host explaining how furniture placement affects guest satisfaction ratings. According to Jessica, couches should always go on the left because that's where people naturally expect them. Right side placement creates subconscious anxiety. The host arrived after checkout to find their carefully designed living room completely transformed. Jessica had also left printed copies of her photos taped to the repositioned furniture, just in case they didn't understand her vision. 78. This guest had a serious problem with the front lawn, not because it was brown or patchy or filled with weeds. The exact opposite actually. The grass was too perfect. Way too perfect. They became convinced it had to be fake, because real grass simply couldn't look that good. Armed with a ruler, they marched outside and started measuring individual blade lengths. Each blade was documented. Photos were taken from multiple angles. They even got down on their hands and knees, inspecting the root system like some kind of lawn detective. The host watched from the window, completely baffled by this impromptu grass investigation. But the guest wasn't done yet. They started worrying about hidden sprinkler systems lurking beneath the surface. Every step across the yard became a potential hazard in their mind. What if they accidentally stepped on a sprinkler head? What if water suddenly shot up without warning? The anxiety was overwhelming. They began tiptoeing around the edges of the lawn, avoiding the center completely. Walking to the front door became an elaborate dance routine designed to minimize grass contact. The final review was something to behold. They wrote extensive paragraphs about unnatural maintenance standards and warned future guests to bring your own grass testing equipment. The host had spent years perfecting that lawn through careful watering, fertilizing, and weekly mowing. Now they were being criticized for doing too good of a job. Sometimes you really can't win in the hospitality business. 79. The guest walked into what they swore was paradise, until they noticed the garden was missing something crucial. No fireflies. Not a single glowing bug dancing through the evening air like some magical Disney movie. The horror. They'd specifically booked this charming cottage because they expected to witness nature's own light show every single night during their romantic getaway. The city location should have been their first clue. Urban yards don't exactly buzz with enchanted insects. But logic wasn't driving this particular complaint train. They'd imagined themselves sipping wine on the patio, surrounded by twinkling creatures straight out of a fairy tale. Instead, they got streetlights and the occasional moth. Their review painted a picture of devastating disappointment. Garden lacks proper wildlife ambiance. They wrote with the seriousness of a nature documentary critic. The absence of fireflies somehow ruined their entire vacation experience. They'd even brought a special camera to capture the magical moments that never materialized. When the confused host tried to explain that fireflies aren't exactly something you can order like pizza, the guest remained unconvinced. The host, desperate to salvage the situation, offered glow sticks as a creative backup solution. Picture it, artificial green light sticks scattered around the garden like some kind of rave decoration. The guest declined the glowing alternative with obvious disgust. Apparently fake fireflies were beneath their sophisticated expectations. They wanted authentic nature magic, not dollar store substitutes. The one-star review warned future guests to bring your own firefly detector because this property clearly couldn't deliver on basic outdoor enchantment requirements. 80. The toaster saga begins with what seems like a reasonable complaint. A guest loads their everything bagel into the machine, selects medium browning, and waits. What emerges looks like a science experiment gone wrong. One half remains pale and doughy. The other half approaches charcoal territory. The guest tries again with different settings. Same result. They photograph the evidence from multiple angles, as if documenting a crime scene. But here's where things get interesting. This isn't just about uneven toasting. The guest becomes convinced the host deliberately chose this specific toaster model to sabotage breakfast experiences. They spend an entire morning conducting experiments with different bread types, timing each cycle with their phone's stopwatch. White bread, sourdough, English muffins. Nothing escapes their scientific inquiry. The review reads like a product testing report. Toaster model XYZ fails basic functionality requirements. They include detailed photographs showing browning patterns across various breakfast items. Temperature settings get rated individually. The guest even measures slot widths with a ruler they apparently travel with. Well, the host responds professionally, offering to replace the appliance. Too late. The guest has already marked the property as not bagel-friendly and warns future visitors to bring their own toasting solutions. They suggest the listing should specify toaster make and model in the amenities section. The kicker: 3 previous guests left glowing reviews specifically praising the perfect breakfast setup. Sometimes kitchen appliances become surprisingly personal battlegrounds where guests project their morning routine expectations onto innocent household items. 81. The guest arrived at the Airbnb and immediately knew something was wrong. This couldn't be the right place. The address matched perfectly, but everything felt off to them. They stood outside for 20 minutes, checking their phone repeatedly, convinced they'd made a terrible mistake. The front door wasn't the right color. They remembered seeing photos online, and this door was definitely different. Maybe it was blue instead of navy, or was it green instead of teal? Either way, this had to be wrong. The guest refused to even try the key code, certain they were trespassing on someone else's property. Then came the panic call to customer service. "You gave me a fake address," they shouted into the phone. The poor representative tried explaining that hosts don't provide fake addresses, but the guest wasn't having it. They demanded a full investigation into this obvious scam and threatened to report the entire situation to authorities. The most frustrating part? They completely refused to check the mailbox number. The customer service rep suggested it multiple times, but the guest insisted that would be breaking and entering, since they were clearly at the wrong house. They'd rather stand on the sidewalk for hours than walk 3 feet to verify the address. The host eventually came outside after receiving frantic calls from Airbnb support. Turns out the guest was at exactly the right place. They'd been staring at the correct door the entire time, but convinced themselves it looked different from the photos. Sometimes reality just doesn't match expectations, even when it's identical. 82. Sarah stared at the washing machine like it had personally betrayed her. The cheerful little melody that played when the cycle finished wasn't just annoying, it was insulting. Who decided laundry needed a soundtrack? The gentle chime rang out every 37 minutes, announcing clean clothes with what she described as mocking enthusiasm. She'd come here for peace and quiet, not a musical appliance that seemed to celebrate its own existence. The host received a detailed complaint about the emotionally manipulative washing machine. Sarah felt the happy beeping was designed to make her feel guilty about not immediately removing her clothes. Why couldn't it just stop? Silent completion was all she wanted. The cheerful tune made her feel like the machine was judging her lifestyle choices. She'd grown up with appliances that finished their jobs without fanfare, and this musical celebration felt foreign and unnecessary. But here's where it gets interesting. Sarah actually called the appliance manufacturer to complain about their overly positive design choices. She suggested they program more neutral sounds, maybe a single beep or complete silence. The customer service representative had never received such a specific complaint about excessive cheerfulness. Sarah left a 1-star review specifically mentioning the washing machine's irritating optimism, warning future guests about the musical interruptions. The host now includes a note in their welcome guide about the washing machine's cheerful completion chime, just in case other guests share Sarah's preference for somber laundry experiences. 83. The guest walks into the bathroom and immediately notices something deeply offensive. The soap isn't beige like everything else, it's pink. Bright, unapologetic pink sitting there like it owns the place. This wasn't just any design choice gone wrong, this was what the guest called a tragic design error in their detailed complaint letter. They'd spent their first hour cataloging every bathroom item. Towels, beige. Shower curtain, beige. Bath mat, you guessed it, beige. But that soap, that rebellious little bar was practically screaming pink at them. The guest couldn't let this slide. They fired off an email to the host demanding an explanation for this color catastrophe. Was it intentional? Did someone run out of beige soap at the store? Were they being punked by a rogue interior designer? But the real kicker came next. The guest didn't just want answers, they wanted action. Their follow-up message included specific brand recommendations for beige soap that would restore harmony to the space. They even attached links to online stores where the host could order properly coordinated bathroom products. Then came the review bomb. 1 star. The guest wrote a passionate essay about how this single pink soap had caused them aesthetic injury during their stay. They couldn't relax knowing that color chaos lurked just steps away from their bed. The host read this feedback 3 times, convinced it was a joke. Nope. Dead serious. Some people really do judge entire vacations based on soap color coordination. 84. The guest arrived at the property and immediately called customer service in a panic. They were absolutely convinced they had been given a fake address. The front door was blue, not red like in the photos they remembered seeing. Never mind that they were looking at a completely different listing from 3 towns over. They refused to even glance at the mailbox number that clearly displayed the correct address. This can't be right, they insisted to the bewildered customer service representative. The host is obviously trying to scam me. The address was crystal clear in their booking confirmation. The GPS had brought them to the exact right spot. But logic wasn't going to change their mind anytime soon. What makes this even more ridiculous? The guest had walked past the correct address 3 times while frantically searching for a red door that never existed. They spent 45 minutes on the phone with customer service, demanding a full refund for the wrong location. The poor representative had to explain basic concepts like different properties have different colored doors. The host eventually came outside to personally escort the guest to the front entrance. Even then, the guest remained suspicious about the whole situation. They kept muttering about how the neighborhood looked different than expected, and how the mailbox seemed too clean to be real. After finally accepting they were in the right place, the guest left a review complaining about confusing directions and misleading photos. They never acknowledged their mistake. Sometimes the simplest things become the biggest problems when people refuse to use common sense. 85. The guest called 3 times before even getting out of their car. Each call had the same frantic energy. "This can't be right," they insisted to customer service. "The address you gave me is completely wrong." The host had provided clear directions, included photos of the front entrance, and even added helpful landmarks. But none of that mattered to this particular guest. They stood outside the correct building for 20 minutes, absolutely convinced they were in the wrong place. The front door was painted blue instead of green, which apparently proved everything was fake. Never mind that the listing photos clearly showed a blue door. The guest had somehow remembered it as green and refused to accept reality. What made this even more ridiculous? The house number was clearly visible on both the door and the mailbox, but asking them to actually look at the mailbox number was apparently too much work. Instead, they preferred to create a whole conspiracy theory about fake addresses and misleading hosts. The truly baffling part came when they finally entered the house. Everything inside matched the photos perfectly. The layout, furniture, even the weird ceramic owl on the kitchen counter, all exactly as advertised. Yet they still spent the first hour muttering about being in the wrong building. Customer service received 4 more calls that evening. Each time the guest demanded an explanation for why the door color didn't match their memory. The host eventually had to send a selfie standing next to their own blue door, just to prove it existed. Some people really do live in their own alternate universe. 86. The guest walks into the Airbnb and immediately feels claustrophobic. Not because the space is small, it's actually quite spacious. The problem? Too many windows. Natural light floods every corner of the room, creating what they describe as an exposed fishbowl effect. They can see neighbors walking by, kids playing in the yard next door, and someone across the street watering their plants. This isn't about privacy concerns from a safety perspective. The guest simply doesn't like feeling on display to the world. They spend their first hour hanging bedsheets over the windows using safety pins and tape from their luggage. The living room transforms into a makeshift cave, blocking out what most people would consider the property's best feature: panoramic views of the neighborhood and distant mountains. But here's where it gets interesting. The guest doesn't just adapt and move on. They write a detailed review explaining how the excessive window situation ruined their entire stay. They suggest the host should consider architectural modifications, perhaps bricking up a few windows to create a more intimate atmosphere. The irony: the listing's main selling point was those exact windows and the abundant natural light they provide. The host receives this feedback with complete bewilderment. Previous guests had consistently praised the bright, airy feeling of the space. Some had even extended their stays specifically because of the beautiful window views. Yet this particular guest rates the property 0 stars purely because of what they call window overload, demanding that future listings include warnings about excessive natural illumination exposure. 87. Solo travelers book king-sized beds all the time without thinking twice. But this particular guest had a complete meltdown over the sheer size of their sleeping arrangements. They called the host at 11 p.m. on their first night, genuinely distressed about feeling lost in such a massive bed. The guest explained they were used to a twin bed at home and felt overwhelmed by all the extra space. They asked if the host could somehow roll in a smaller bed for the remainder of their stay. When the host politely explained that wasn't possible, the guest got creative with their own solution. They gathered every pillow in the house and built barriers around themselves, essentially creating a fort in the middle of the king bed. The next morning they sent photos to the host showing their nest setup, complete with strategic pillow placement and bundled blankets. But the real kicker came in their review. They marked the listing down specifically for being wasteful with bed space, and suggested future solo travelers should have the option to request twin beds. They even calculated how much unused mattress space they had each night, and included it in their complaint. The host discovered after checkout that the guest had spent their entire 3-night stay sleeping sideways across the bed instead of lengthwise. Apparently this made the king feel more like a queen to them. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that someone could literally sleep sideways on a problem they created in their own head. 88. The bathroom was perfect. Too perfect, according to this guest who couldn't find a single scented candle anywhere in the room. They expected to walk into a luxury spa experience the moment they opened the door, complete with lavender aromas wafting through the air. Instead, they got clean towels and working plumbing. How dare the host provide basic functionality without the ambiance? This particular traveler had very specific expectations about what constitutes proper hospitality. They believed every nightstand should feature at least one flickering candle, preferably in calming scents like eucalyptus or vanilla. The absence of these aromatic accessories was apparently grounds for a scathing review. They wrote multiple paragraphs detailing how the odorless room had completely ruined their relaxation plans. Well, the host found themselves in quite the predicament. Fire safety regulations and insurance policies generally frown upon leaving open flames in rental properties. But try explaining that to someone who considers unscented air a personal attack on their vacation vibes. The guests' disappointment was so profound that they offered to provide a detailed shopping list of recommended candle brands and placement strategies. The strangest part, this complaint started a trend. 3 more guests that month specifically requested candles in their pre-arrival messages. The host now keeps a collection of battery-operated flameless candles as a compromise. They flicker convincingly and smell like vanilla, but won't burn the house down. Sometimes the most ridiculous complaints lead to the most creative solutions, even when the original request defied basic common sense. 89. The guest called 3 times within the first hour, each call more frantic than the last. "Your Wi-Fi doesn't work in the bathtub," they announced, as if this was a basic human right being violated. The host calmly explained that most routers don't have underwater capabilities, but the guest wasn't having it. They had specifically planned to binge-watch their favorite series while soaking. The bathroom was their designated relaxation zone, and dead internet zones were apparently not part of the package. "I need full coverage," they demanded, suggesting the router be relocated next to the tub for optimal streaming. The host gently mentioned potential electrical hazards, but safety concerns took a backseat to entertainment needs. The guests spent 20 minutes testing signal strength throughout the house with their phone. They created a detailed map of Wi-Fi dead zones, complete with signal strength measurements. The living room got 5 bars, the kitchen managed 3, but the bathroom, complete digital darkness. Then came the creative solutions. They tried extending Ethernet cables, repositioning the router, and even sitting halfway out of the tub with their laptop balanced precariously on the toilet seat. None of these arrangements provided the seamless streaming experience they craved. The host watched this technological dance with growing bewilderment. By checkout, the guest had left a comprehensive review detailing the Wi-Fi coverage limitations. They included a helpful diagram showing exactly where future guests could and couldn't expect internet access. The guidebook now features a dedicated section on Wi-Fi range limitations, complete with a coverage map that resembles a treasure hunt for digital connectivity. 90. When you welcome someone into your home, you probably expect them to appreciate your effort. Basic courtesy, right? Well, this guest had other plans. After spending weeks preparing her Airbnb listing with detailed instructions, maps, and even photos of the front entrance, Sarah thought she'd covered everything. The address was crystal clear, GPS coordinates included, street number painted in bright gold on the mailbox. But sometimes preparation meets stubborn confusion head-on. The guest called within minutes of arrival, voice rising with panic. "I'm at the wrong house," she insisted. "This can't be right." Sarah calmly confirmed the address, asking what seemed off. "The front door is blue, not red like in your photos," came the frantic reply. Here's where it gets interesting. Sarah had never posted photos of a red door, her door had always been blue. The guest was looking at someone else's listing entirely, yet refused to believe it. "Your address must be fake," she declared, threatening to call customer service immediately. The solution seemed obvious. Check the mailbox number right there in front of her. "But no, I don't need to check anything," the guest snapped. "I know what I booked." She spent 20 minutes arguing with Sarah instead of simply reading the numbers clearly displayed. Eventually she discovered she'd been standing at the correct house all along. The red door belonged to a different property she'd considered, but never booked. Did she apologize for the confusion? Not exactly. Her review later mentioned the stressful check-in process caused by the host's unclear directions. 91. Sarah stood in front of what she was absolutely certain was the wrong building, clutching her phone like a lifeline. The address matched perfectly with her booking confirmation, but something felt terribly off. The front door was painted forest green, not the cheerful blue she remembered from the listing photos. This had to be some kind of mistake, right? She circled the block 3 times, double-checking street signs and house numbers. Everything pointed to this being the correct location, but Sarah's gut told her otherwise. The host had been crystal clear in their messages about the address, even including helpful landmarks like the corner bakery and the red mailbox. But none of that mattered because Sarah was convinced she was being scammed. Rather than simply walking up to check the mailbox number that was clearly visible from the sidewalk, Sarah immediately called Airbnb customer service. She spent 20 minutes on hold, growing more frustrated by the minute. When a representative finally answered, she launched into a detailed explanation about how the host had obviously provided a fake address and how this was clearly some elaborate fraud scheme. The customer service agent patiently asked her to verify the house number on the mailbox. Sarah refused, insisting it was pointless since she was obviously at the wrong location. Meanwhile, the actual host watched from their window, wondering why this guest kept pacing back and forth on the sidewalk instead of just ringing the doorbell. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the ones people avoid the most. 92. The guest stepped out of their rideshare, looked around the quiet suburban street, and immediately called the host in a panic. "This can't be right," they insisted over the phone. "Your listing said there would be nightlife, but all I hear are crickets." The host, confused, explained that the neighborhood was accurately described as residential and peaceful, but the guest wasn't having it. They had somehow convinced themselves that every Airbnb booking came with guaranteed entertainment. Walking down the sidewalk at 9 p.m., they found closed shops and dimmed house lights. "Where are the street performers?" they demanded. "Where's the live music?" The host patiently explained that this wasn't Las Vegas or New York's Times Square. This was a quiet family neighborhood where people actually slept at reasonable hours. But logic wasn't working here. The guest had built up an entire fantasy about what their stay would include. They expected bustling cafes open until midnight, street vendors selling late-night snacks, and maybe even impromptu dance parties on every corner. Instead, they found suburban tranquility, the kind of peace most travelers would pay extra for. Their 1-star review became legendary among local hosts. "Warning: this area shuts down too early. No energy whatsoever." Host should have mentioned the lack of excitement. They suggested the host organize live music programming for future guests, apparently unaware that residential noise ordinances exist. The review concluded with a demand that all future listings include detailed nightlife schedules for the surrounding area. 93. Sarah stared at the kitchen counter like it had personally wronged her. The host had stocked instant coffee, sugar packets, and even those little creamers that somehow never expire. But where was the tea? Not just any tea. She wanted options. Earl Grey for sophistication, chamomile for bedtime, maybe some exotic blend she'd never heard of. The coffee maker sat there smugly, as if mocking her British sensibilities. She opened every cabinet twice, hoping a hidden tea stash would magically appear. Nothing. Just more coffee supplies and a lonely box of hot chocolate mix that looked like it survived the last decade. Her finger hovered over the host's phone number. Should she call? Text? This felt like an emergency, but would they understand? In her mind, any respectable kitchen should offer both coffee and tea. It's basic hospitality, right? Then came the review writing session. Sarah pulled out her phone and started typing with the passion of someone whose morning routine had been personally attacked. "Not suitable for tea drinkers," she wrote, adding a stern warning about the coffee-only situation. She even took photos of the barren tea drawer as evidence. The host read the review later, genuinely confused. They'd never considered tea essential, until now. Sarah's complaint sparked a mini revolution in their hosting approach. The next grocery run included 6 different tea varieties, ranging from basic black tea to something called Mountain Berry Sunset, all because one guest couldn't start her day without proper leaf-based beverages. 94. The guest arrives and immediately notices something deeply troubling about the closet hangers. These aren't just any hangers, they're basic wooden ones. Not the velvet-wrapped non-slip variety that serious travelers apparently expect. The horror. Within minutes, the complaint begins. Why would any respectable host provide such inferior hanging solutions? The guests' expensive clothes deserve better treatment. Those wooden hangers might leave marks or, worse yet, fail to maintain the perfect shape of delicate fabrics. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of hanging anything up, the guest decides to pack everything back into their suitcase. That'll show the host. Living out of luggage, becomes a form of protest against substandard hanger quality. The demands start rolling in. The host needs to invest in premium hangers immediately. Not just any premium hangers, mind you, but specific brands. The guest helpfully provides links to their favorite online retailers, complete with product specifications and color preferences. Let's not forget the detailed review that follows. Future guests receive a stern warning about the hanger situation. Photos accompany the complaint, showing the offensive wooden hangers in all their basic glory. The guest rates the entire stay poorly, citing the hangers as a major factor in their disappointment. The host, meanwhile, adds hanger upgrade to their ever-growing wish list of guest demands. They wonder if anyone actually travels specifically for premium hanging experiences. Apparently some people do. The wooden hangers that served hundreds of previous guests just fine suddenly become the villain of this particular vacation story. 95. The bathroom mirror situation reached peak absurdity when a guest complained that hot shower steam fogged up the reflective surface. This wasn't about functionality or safety. The guest genuinely expected a heated anti-fog mirror as standard equipment in what was clearly a modest Airbnb rental. The complaint email arrived with scientific precision. The guest had timed how long the mirror stayed foggy after each shower session. 37 minutes, they reported. Completely unacceptable for modern hospitality standards. What makes this story even better? The guest wasn't actually inconvenienced by the fogged mirror. They admitted to drawing funny faces in the condensation out of boredom. Photos were included as evidence. Smiley faces, stick figures, and what appeared to be a crude drawing of a cat decorated the steamed glass. The host received a detailed recommendation to modernize all bathroom facilities immediately. The guest suggested specific brands of heated mirrors, complete with Amazon links and installation tutorials. They'd clearly done their homework on anti-fog technology. But here's the kicker. The guest used this minor inconvenience to justify a 2-star review. They marked down the entire property because steam behaved exactly like steam always behaves when it meets a cold surface. Physics became the enemy of hospitality. The host now includes a small squeegee and towel specifically for mirror cleaning. The listing description mentions that mirrors may fog during shower use, as is scientifically normal. Sometimes you have to state the obvious when dealing with extraordinary expectations that defy basic laws of nature. 96. Sarah from Manchester arrived at her Airbnb rental, clutching a printed confirmation email and wearing the expression of someone who'd just discovered their GPS had been lying to them for 3 hours. The address was crystal clear. The house number matched perfectly. Even the little garden gnome from the listing photos was standing exactly where it should be, grinning that same ridiculous ceramic smile. But Sarah wasn't having any of it. She marched up to the front door, stared at it for a full minute, then immediately called customer service. "This can't be right," she declared into her phone, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "The door is blue in real life, but it looked more like navy blue in the photos. This is obviously the wrong house." The customer service representative patiently explained that lighting and camera settings can affect how colors appear online. Sarah disagreed. She was convinced the host had given her a fake address, possibly as part of some elaborate Airbnb scam she'd read about on Facebook. The rep suggested she check the mailbox number, which was clearly visible right next to where she was standing. "I'm not checking anything," Sarah announced. "I know what I booked, and this isn't it. The real house is probably down the street somewhere." She spent another 20 minutes on the phone, demanding a full investigation into the fraudulent listing while standing directly in front of the correct house. The host eventually had to come outside and personally escort her through the front door she refused to believe belonged to her rental. 97. Water conservation has become the battleground for modern travelers. Apparently, this particular guest discovered a single drop forming at the bathroom faucet every hour. Not a steady stream, mind you. Just one lonely drop making its way to the sink below. Most people would ignore this minor plumbing quirk, but not our eco-warrior guest. They pulled out measuring equipment and started tracking the water waste with scientific precision. The mathematics became their obsession. 1 drop per hour equals 24 drops per day, they calculated. Multiply that by the average guest stay, and suddenly we're talking about what they deemed catastrophic environmental damage. The host received detailed emails about global water shortages and climate change, all stemming from a faucet that barely qualified as leaking. When the host quickly arranged for a plumber to fix the issue, you'd think the story would end there. But our guest's environmental anxiety had already taken root. Even after the repair, They spent the remainder of their stay checking the faucet every few hours, convinced it might start dripping again. The worry consumed their vacation entirely. They left lengthy reviews about the water crisis they witnessed, complete with photos of the now perfectly functioning faucet. Their final verdict: the listing wasn't eco-friendly enough, despite the host's immediate response to fix a problem most guests would never notice. Sometimes the smallest issues create the biggest headaches for everyone involved. 98. Sarah Chen stared at the pond in the downtown park, clutching her phone like it held the secrets of the universe. The ducks paddled peacefully across the water, completely unaware they were about to become the center of an Airbnb controversy that would baffle hosts for months to come. She had specifically chosen this rental because the listing mentioned it was near scenic park with wildlife viewing opportunities. What it failed to mention, according to Sarah, was the complete absence of duck feeding supplies. Her first message to the host came at 7 a.m. sharp. "Hi, I'm at the park but there's no bread or duck food anywhere in the kitchen. How am I supposed to feed the ducks?" The host, Maria, responded politely that feeding wildlife wasn't recommended and could actually harm the animals. Sarah wasn't having it. She fired back with a lengthy explanation about her childhood duck feeding memories and how this was ruining her entire vacation experience. But here's where it gets really wild. Sarah actually called Airbnb customer service to complain about the missing amenities. She argued that since the listing mentioned wildlife viewing, the host should provide appropriate wildlife interaction supplies. The customer service rep had to explain that viewing and feeding were two very different activities. Sarah demanded a partial refund for what she called false advertising about the duck experience. She even took photos of the empty-handed ducks as evidence of her disappointment, claiming they looked expectant and hungry because of the host's negligence. 99. The TV remote sits innocently on the coffee table, its black surface dotted with dozens of tiny buttons. To most people, it's just another piece of technology, but to this particular guest, it might as well have been the control panel of a spaceship. The complaint email arrived 3 hours after check-in. "There are too many buttons on this remote," it began. "I just wanted to watch the news, but there are like 50 different options." The guest had somehow managed to change the TV language to Korean, then Spanish. The audio settings got switched to Japanese dubbing mode. What makes this even more bizarre? The remote wasn't particularly complex. It had the standard power button, volume controls, and channel numbers. Basic stuff that most 10-year-olds figure out in seconds. But this guest treated each button like it might trigger a nuclear launch sequence. The photos they uploaded to their review were genuinely hilarious. Close-up shots of the remote from different angles, with red arrows pointing to various buttons. They'd even drawn question marks in permanent marker next to the input selection button. The dedication to documenting their confusion was almost admirable. After receiving multiple panicked text messages about the impossible television situation, the host drove over with a label maker. They spent 20 minutes creating tiny stickers for each button: volume up, channel down, menu. The guest watched this process with the intensity of someone learning life-saving medical procedures. The next morning brought one final message: "TV works now, but why didn't it come this way originally?" 100. Guest expected their electric toothbrush to charge via USB in the bathroom. They searched every outlet, every surface, every possible charging station. Nothing. The disappointment was crushing. They'd traveled hundreds of miles with a dead toothbrush, banking on universal charging capabilities that simply didn't exist in this particular Airbnb. The guests' frustration spilled over into a detailed review. They documented their oral hygiene crisis with scientific precision. Photos of their uncharged toothbrush, screenshots of dead battery warnings, a full timeline of their dental care disruption. Their 2-minute brushing routine had been compromised, and someone needed to pay. But here's the weird part. They never asked the host about charging options, never mentioned their specific needs during booking, never brought a backup charger despite traveling internationally. The expectation was that hosts should somehow anticipate every possible electronic device and provide corresponding charging solutions. The host received this feedback with genuine confusion. USB toothbrush chargers weren't exactly standard amenities. Most guests brought phone chargers, laptop cords, maybe a tablet adapter, but specialized dental equipment, that was entering uncharted territory. The host immediately updated their amenities list to include charging station with multiple USB ports after this incident. The guest's review became a cautionary tale in Airbnb host forums. Other hosts started questioning what other mysterious charging needs they might be missing. electric shavers, heated eyelash curlers, portable coffee grinders. The possibilities seemed endless, and slightly terrifying for hosts trying to anticipate every guest's technological requirements. 101. Sarah booked what she thought would be the perfect romantic getaway retreat. She'd studied every photo, read through the amenities list twice, and even called to confirm the location. Everything seemed flawless until breakfast time rolled around on her first morning. The kitchen was stocked with coffee, tea, fresh fruit, and basic breakfast items, but Sarah stood there staring at the pantry with genuine disappointment washing over her face. Where was her favorite cereal? You know, that specific brand with the honey clusters that she ate every single morning at home for the past 3 years. She called her host immediately. "I'm really surprised you didn't have my cereal ready," she explained with complete seriousness. "I just assumed you'd know what I like to eat." The host, understandably confused, asked what cereal she meant. Sarah described it in detail, down to the exact flavor and box size. But here's where it gets interesting. Sarah genuinely believed this was a reasonable expectation. She'd seen hotels that asked about dietary preferences, so why wouldn't an Airbnb host research her personal breakfast habits? In her mind, good hospitality meant predicting guest needs before they even expressed them. The host tried explaining that without prior communication, there was no way to know individual food preferences. Sarah listened politely, but remained convinced that attentive hosts should somehow intuit these details. She left a review suggesting that all hosts should send pre-arrival surveys about favorite foods, preferred breakfast timing, and meal presentation styles. The review concluded with her honest belief that exceptional hosts possess psychic abilities about guest preferences.